Chapter 161. The acquired spirit item, the Pearl of Fire element, was an innate spirit item condensed from the acquired true flame aura. It represented the strongest power that the acquired flame could achieve in this world. As Wu Qi did not have the time to truly refine it, he could only throw it out like a brick and smash it at someone. But that was more than enough. Relying solely on the power of the Pearl of Fire element, the talisman formation of 4 elements was instantly destroyed by the highly condensed, high-temperature and high-pressure flame. The frightening firepower that could instantly turn several dozens of lofty mountains into wisps of green smoke dispersed in all directions, blasting the 4 talisman treasures far away. The crimson flame transformed into a wall of flame that stood 1,000 feet tall and shot in all directions. Wu Qi was blown away by one of the flame walls, and his short hair was burned into ashes once again. Not only his hair, all his body hair was burned away by the flame, and his body was now naked like a large piece of glass. Ling Wujiu and his companions never expected that Wu Qi would have such a spirit item. The scorching heat waves rushed whistling and rushed into their bodies, nearly burning them into ashes. Large amounts of sweat burst out from their bodies, turning into water vapor and evaporating in an instant. The fat under their skin was melted into liquid grease by the high temperature, flowing out from their pores and igniting on the surface of their skin. Their hair and fingernails were scorched and twisted by the high temperature, and their bodies began to soften and collapse like candles. The severe pain from the scorching flame made Ling Wujiu and his companions howl miserably. But they did not have any way to fight back. Apart from drawing all kinds of talismans that could be used to kill people, the talisman masters of Heavenly Spirit sect had their strongest weapon, which was also their only magical item, the talisman treasure. The mystic cultivation technique of Celestial Spirit sect was to use the technique of forging talisman treasures to transform one's gold core into a collection of talisman symbols. Only in this way could one communicate with talisman treasures and unleash an extremely powerful lethality. After the Jin Dan was engraved with a large number of runes, it could no longer communicate with other flying swords and magical treasures. Facing the raging flame that was burning their bodies, they could only endure it, persisting in injecting their energies into Ling Wujiu's body, allowing him to activate the Heavenly Star Positioning Disc. The Heavenly Star Positioning Disc was an upper-tier magical treasure that was extremely rare in Great Yen Dynasty. Almost all of them could produce their own item spirit, turning them into a spirit item. This magical treasure corresponded to the stars, and it had the powerful effect of surveying mountains, rivers, and veins, as well as peeking into the mysteries of all kinds of formations. Using the secret technique of Heavenly Spirit sect, it could also perform all kinds of divination. For example, one of its functions was to roughly determine the location of Wu Qi within 30,000 miles. It was also one of the few magical treasures that were compatible with the Heavenly Spirit sect's talisman masters and could be driven by them, apart from their own talisman treasures. Just when Ling Wujiu and the other 3 were nearly turned into dried corpses by the scorching heat unleashed by the Spirit Fire Pearl, the energies they injected into the pearl finally activated the cornerstone treasure of Heavenly Spirit sect. All of a sudden, several thousand tiny silver specks flickered on the surface of the Heavenly Star Positioning Disc. The stars that appeared in the bright sky suddenly grew brighter. Visible strands of cyan and silver light fell from the sky like mist, quickly injecting into the bodies of Ling Wujiu and the others. Abruptly, the surrounding flames were extinguished, and the bone-piercing cold energy of the stars enveloped the space of several miles in circumference. The Heavenly Star Positioning Disc soared up into the sky. Accompanied by a deep, muffled noise of a millstone turning, the Heavenly Star Positioning Disc began to spin slowly. Several dozens of starlights flickered on the surface of the disc, then a silver beam that was as thin as a hair shot out abruptly. Right after landing on the ground, Wu Qi dodged the silver beam, which was aimed at his heart, and brushed past his body. A frightening force, which contained a coldness mixed with a strange high temperature, brushed past Wu Qi's body. A thumb-sized piece of flesh was missing from his left shoulder. The wound was so clean that it could be used as a mirror, without even a single drop of blood. This was the 6-9 Spirit Star's destructive beam unleashed by the Heavenly Star Positioning Disc. This destructive beam was mixed with the energy of the stars, and combined with the innate magnetic force that came from the ninth heaven that could innately wipe out all life force, it possessed the power to destroy everything. Just now, that thin beam of silver beam was nearly as powerful as a full-force attack launched by an Earth immortal of nascent soul realm, wielding a middle-grade magical treasure, and possessed the power to kill an Earth immortal of nascent soul realm. Fortunately, Wu Qi had a strong fleshly body, and his reaction speed was extremely fast. Once his body landed on the ground, he immediately leaped up and avoided the attack of the silver beam. Otherwise, if the beam had hit his heart, he would have been dead. A strong lingering fear made all the muscles on Wu Qi's body tighten. Just now, his lower abdomen trembled, and he nearly made a fool out of himself. That silver beam had almost killed him. It was just a little bit more, and it would have killed him. Wu Qi let out a furious roar. His eyes shone with a five-colored gleam, and without hesitation, he cried out, "Go!" Immediately after that, the silver lotus flower shot out from the spirit fire pearl slowly opened up, shrouded in a faint five-colored glow, and transformed into a magnificent lotus flower with a circumference of several hundred feet, shielding right in front of the heavenly star positioning disc. 13 beams of destructive light from the spirit fire pearl hit the silver lotus flower in a row, causing the lotus flower to flicker and flicker. Deep, muffled thunderclaps kept ringing out, yet none of them could break the defense on the surface of the silver lotus flower. 360 grand white spatial breaching pearls of innate energies shot out with a loud whistling noise, and in just a blink of an eye, they had teleported into the bodies of Ling Wujiu and his companions. The high-frequency vibrating spatial breaching pearls pierced through their bodies, and in an instant, completely destroyed their corporeal bodies. Ling Wujiu let out a miserable howl. His Jin Dan shot up into the sky in a beam of bright light, reaching an altitude of 1,000 feet, and fled towards the outside of Meng Mountains. As a Jin Dan cultivator, his soul had completely fused with his Jin Dan. As long as he could break his gold core and form his nascent soul, he would be able to attain the earth immortal realm of nascent soul realm. Therefore, as a Jin Dan cultivator, even if his corporeal body was destroyed, he still had the ability to escape. As long as Jin Dan could escape and find a suitable body to possess within 7 days, he would be able to restore his Dharma body, and his cultivation base would not drop too much. But, how could Wu Qi allow Ling Wujiu to escape? From the pistil of the silver lotus sprayed out countless five-colored light threads, which tightly bound all 4 Jin Dan, including Ling Wujiu, and pulled them down from the ground, imprisoning them inside the silver lotus. The heavenly star positioning disc, which had just unleashed 14 destructive light beams from the 6-9 spirit stars, dimmed down and fell slowly to the ground. Although this upper-grade magical treasure was very powerful, and had the power to kill an earth immortal of nascent soul realm, it also consumed an astronomical amount of energy. Although Ling Wujiu and his companions had injected all their energy into the disc, they could only unleash a dozen destructive light beams. Apart from causing Wu Qi to lose a small piece of his flesh, they did not cause any real harm to him. Panting heavily, Wu Qi struggled and leaped up from the ground. In a flurry, he retracted the silver lotus, fire spirit pearl, and all the other magical treasures back into his body, then grabbed the heavenly star positioning disc complacently. The cornerstone treasure of heavenly spirit sect. Ha ha ha, it's mine now. An upper-grade magical treasure. Just one item spirit, and it can become a spirit item. Are you here to kill someone, or to give me a treasure? After carefully fiddling with the heavenly star positioning disc for a while, Wu Qi, who did not have the time to refine it, shoved it into his storage ring, then sped towards the place where Ling Wujiu and his companions were killed. A few shiny storage rings could be seen glinting amidst the mess on the ground. Wu Qi's eyes were gleaming with a green gleam. After a short but intense battle just now, relying on his incredibly strong body and a large number of precious treasures, Wu Qi had killed 5 Jin Dan human immortals of heavenly spirit sect. However, the battlefield was in a complete mess. A flaming dragon talisman had blown a large hole in the ground, and the top-grade acquired flame unleashed from the fire spirit pearl had burned the ground to a depth of 30 feet, turning the area several miles in circumference into a clump of lava. Carefully, Wu Qi found 5 storage rings from the lava, then sent his divine sense into them. A loud laughter towered up into the sky. Wu Qi was laughing so hard that his eyes were narrowed into 2 fine lines. Needless to say, there was a huge amount of talismans in the storage rings. These few people were elders of Jin Dan in Heavenly Spirit sect, holding a high position and great power. Every day, when they had nothing to do, they would draw a large number of talismans out of habit. Among them, there were some powerful high-grade talismans that they were reluctant to sell or give away to others. After several hundreds of years of accumulation, these 5 storage rings actually contained over 20,000 powerful talismans of various colors. It made Wu Qi's mouth turn crooked with joy. These were the accumulation of 5 Jin Dan human immortals for several hundreds of years. Every single one of these 20,000 talismans was of excellent quality, and each of them was priceless. Putting aside the energy stones and spirit herbs, they were just enough to replenish the consumption of Wu Qi when he was constructing his secret abodes. As for the other raw materials used to draw talismans, Wu Qi only gave them a brief glance, then threw them aside. What made Wu Qi wild with joy the most was that Ling Wujiu, as the elder of imparting technique of Heavenly Spirit sect, actually found in his storage ring was the mystic scripture of talismans, the Heavenly Spirit star positioning technique. It was a book divided into 3 parts, with each part being divided into 13 volumes. It contained all the runes, formations, and restrictive spells of Heavenly Spirit sect, a comprehensive book. From the most basic explosive talisman, to the 9 upper and 9 lower spirit heaven celestial thunderbolt subduing talisman, which had the power equivalent to the full force strike of a nascent divinity heaven immortal, it contained everything one could think of. Clutching the few storage rings tightly in his hand, Wu Qi threw his head back and let out a few loud laughs, then hastily put everything inside into his own storage bracelet. After that, he threaded the rings with some natural silk and hung them around his neck. After tidying up all the storage rings, Wu Qi rushed towards the 4 talisman treasures that were thrown tens of miles away by the explosion. These 4 talisman treasures were treasures that consumed an enormous amount of natural treasures, as well as several hundred years of painstaking effort. Although they were struck by the spirit fire pearl, and the true flame that exploded out from the pearl dispersed the gathered natural energies, the talisman treasures themselves did not suffer any damage. As long as they were slightly refined using the mystic technique of Heavenly Spirit sect, they could be used as excellent materials to construct formations. These talisman treasures were absolutely qualified to be used as the formation cores of a few killing formations. Just as Wu Qi placed the 4 talisman treasures on the ground in a straight line, and was happily admiring the complicated runes engraved on them, an impassioned singing voice was heard coming from afar. How can it be said to have no clothes? To share the same robe with one's son. The king sends his army to repair my spear and spear. To share the same hatred with one's son. How can it be said to have no clothes? To share the same fate with one's son. The king sends his army to repair my spear and halberd. To share the same fate with one's son. How can it be said to have no clothes? To share the same fate with one's son. The king sends his army to repair my armor and weapons. To share the same fate with one's son. The singing voice came from afar with an unconcealable sharpness and murderous aura that soared into the sky. Wu Qi felt a chill running down his spine. He suddenly felt as if he was being stared at by dozens of ferocious beasts, as a faint cold air was exuding from all the pores on his body. Slowly turning around, Wu Qi saw a burly man, clad in a pale red heavy armor, carrying a tiger-headed spear on his shoulder. He was leading a group of 7 to 8 warriors, each clad in a dark heavy armor, and a few dozens of warriors clad in a dark soft armor. They had formed into a crescent moon formation that had no loopholes, and were slowly approaching Wu Qi. These warriors walked towards Wu Qi as if they were on a spring outing, as if nothing had happened, and they were even singing. However, their gray and emotionless eyes were locked onto Wu Qi's body. From top to bottom, as long as it was a part of his body where he could launch an attack, he would be stared at by one or a few of them. On top of that, they seemed to be walking casually, but no matter how they walked, the crescent moon formation would never move. The burly man with the tiger-headed spear giggled, then turned to look at Wu Qi from a distance of about 1 mile away and said, "Hand over all your energy stones and kill yourself right here, and I'll spare your soul for reincarnation." The burly man's laughter was bright, yet it was filled with a bloody aura of Azura. Chapter 162. Looking at the group of warriors, who were emanating a strong smell of blood from their bodies and had an aura that made them look like wolves and leopards, Wu Qi put away everything around him and slowly retreated backward. Every time those warriors took a step forward, he would take a step back. Unhurriedly, he kept a distance of 2,000 feet from them. While retreating, Wu Qi laughed and said, "That's not creative at all. If you want to rob me, so be it. Why do you make it sound like you have done me a great favor? You are a prostitute, so why do you want to erect a chastity?" The man with the tiger-headed spear frowned and looked at Wu Qi, then said coolly, "I know you are a prostitute, but what is a chastity?" The memory of Lu Xiaobai in Wu Qi's soul suddenly flickered. He said happily, "So you don't know the meaning of this sentence? You are just an uncultured, boorish fellow." "He, what I mean is, you are a man like Dao Chuo, so why do you talk about benevolence, righteousness, and morality like Confucius? I don't like the idea of leaving me a broken soul for reincarnation. Be careful, don't get yourself killed here." The burly man grinned and grinned like a ferocious tiger that had been provoked. Then, he laughed sinisterly. He shook his head and did not say a word. Instead, he waved the tiger-head wind-cracking spear and increased his speed, chasing after Wu Qi. His heavy footsteps collided with the ground, causing the ground to tremble slightly. Both of his feet had turned blurry, and he leaped towards Wu Qi along with a strong gust of wind. Wu Qi looked at the man smilingly. Suddenly, both of his feet turned blurry as well, and he moved backward along with a strong gust of wind. Coldly, he stared at this man, who had the cultivation base of late stage of Jin Dan realm, while silently calculating the distance between him and the few human immortals and the dozens of embryonic breath Taoists behind him. As long as this man was more than 1,000 feet away from his subordinates, Wu Qi was confident that he could kill him in the shortest time possible. The few Jin Dan human immortals behind the burly man had vaguely linked up with the Xiantian Daoist masters behind them, forming a military killing formation. For cultivators, any formation was dangerous. Thus, they needed to be vigilant. Wu Qi would not risk being surrounded by the crescent moon killing array to kill this man. Even if he was confident that he could kill everyone in front of him with the least amount of effort, there was no need for him to take unnecessary risks. The two of them, one chasing and the other fleeing, ran for 3 miles in an instant. After running for 3 miles, Wu Qi's upper body didn't move at all. He faced the man who was chasing after him with a sinister sneer on his face. The burly man's expression became more and more ferocious. The muscles on his face tightened and his eyes turned red as if they were about to bleed. All of a sudden, the distance between the burly man and his subordinates was already 1,000 feet, out of the range of the crescent moon killing array. Wu Qi let out a long and sonorous cry. Suddenly, the sword of greedy wolf shot out from his mouth, transforming into 3 large wooden stakes, each about 10 feet long and 2 feet thick, and shrouded in a strong green wind, thrusting towards the burly man's head. 7 wolf heads could be vaguely seen on both sides of the wooden stakes. As long as the burly man revealed even the slightest mistake, they would be able to seize the opportunity and kill him, seizing his blood essence and life force. The burly man let out a wild laugh. Abruptly, the tiger-headed spear let out a deep, deep whistling noise. A clump of blood-red light shot out from the spear, transforming into a dozen of several feet long blood-red beams that leaped up into the sky and tangled with the 3 wooden stakes. The tiger-headed spear transformed into a 30 feet long, blood-red tiger, roaring and fighting fiercely with the 7 wolf heads. With a wild laugh, the burly man pulled out the sword with his right hand and threw it into the air. The sword transformed into a 10 feet long blood-red beam and hacked down towards Wu Qi's head. After that, he curled up his body and leaped forward, spreading his arms and grabbing towards Wu Qi. Wu Qi let out a loud laugh. Then, a golden gleam flashed from his mouth, and the golden coin that could knock down a flying sword had been shot out from his mouth. It transformed into a huge golden coin the size of a water tank, thrusting towards the blood-red beam above his head. A misty gleam shot out from the eye of the golden coin, quickly slicing off the blood-red beam on the flying sword, revealing the true form of the flying sword. In just a blink of an eye, the flying sword was sliced off by the golden coin and fell to the ground, bouncing and bouncing like a living creature. While laughing joyfully, Wuqi stared at the burly man and cried out, "Come, let's have a contest of strength." Then, he shook his arms, exerting a divine strength of several tens of thousands of kilograms with his indestructible aura, thrusting towards the approaching fists of the burly man. A muffled boom rang out when the fists and palms collided with each other. The burly man coughed out a mouthful of blood and was knocked flying away by the tremendous force. Wuqi let out a muffled snort as well, as he staggered back by the mighty force coming from the burly man's arms. The strength of the burly man was very strong. Although the strength of his body was not as strong as Wuqi, the strength he could unleash in an instant was equal to the strength of Wuqi's body. Wuqi merely possessed a very strong and indestructible body, but the burly man had cultivated a technique that specialized in body strengthening. Not only was it a body-strengthening technique, it was also a righteous body-strengthening technique that was at least 10 times more powerful than the evil technique of Shi Tianma and his son, who were cultivating the body of half-demon beast. Although the strength of his body was only less than 1/20th of Wuqi's, by relying on the divine abilities found in the body-strengthening technique, the strength unleashed by the burly man was more than enough to fight evenly with Wuqi. However, Wuqi's body was too strong. Therefore, although the burly man's strength was equal to Wuqi's, when the two enormous forces collided, Wuqi's body did not suffer any harm, but the bones of the burly man's arms had countless cracks, and all his internal organs had suffered a severe shock. Wuqi, who was forced to stagger back for tens of steps and still could not stand firmly, cried out in astonishment, "What an incredible strength! What cultivation technique are you cultivating?" On the other side, the burly man laughed wildly and said, "Wonderful. You're just a little man who hasn't even cultivated the Jin Dan, yet you have a fleshly body that is similar to my father's. What kind of natural treasure have you eaten? Young lad, you have a bright future ahead of you, and I, Bai Qitian, have taken a liking to you. What do you think? Join the army of Daqin and conquer the world for our imperial emperor, fighting for glory, splendor, wealth, and rank. This is a great fortune for you." Not allowing Wuqi to say anything, Bai Qitian had already cried out, "Bai Qitian, the general of Yulin army of Daqin, am recruiting you to join the army of Daqin. Why don't you accept it quickly? With the physique and potential of your body, with just a little training, you will become an invincible and fierce general. This is your luck." Wuqi, who was staggering backward, nearly tripped on a rock and fell flat on his face. "The general of Yulin army of Daqin, Bai Qitian?" Wuqi cried out in shock, "Bai Qitian, who is your father? With such a big tone, what is the benefit of joining the army of Daqin?" He opened his mouth and coughed out a mouthful of blood, with both of his arms dangling beside his shoulders. Bai Qitian gave Wuqi a deep look, and with a joyful expression, he let out a loud laugh and said, "My father is the Prince of Wuan of Great Qin Dynasty, the Commander-in-Chief of Military Forces, Bai Qi. Father is thirsty for talent, and he likes young heroes the most. Someone like you, who doesn't know a thing about cultivation, but has frighteningly good luck, joining the army of Daqin is the best." The Prince of Wuan of Daqin, the Governor-General of the army, Bai Qi. Wuqi's heart and lungs were trembling. The Prince of Wuan of Qin, Bai Qi, was now the Prince of Wuan of Daqin, and the Governor-General of the army? This was the man who was addressed as the butcher by the people of the Warring States period. Even though it had been over 2,000 years, his name still made Wuqi shiver and feel extremely uncomfortable. He gave Bai Qitian a deep look, then spun and fled without saying a word. The sword of greedy wolf let out a long and sharp whistle, transforming into a dark beam and flying back into Wuqi's hand, no longer tangling with Bai Qitian's spear. Seeing that Wuqi had turned and fled, Bai Qitian hastened his pace and chased after him. He roared, "Little fellow, I've given you face, but you don't want it. Are you courting death? Either you join the army of Daqin, or you become a wanted criminal of the Daqin. Do you want a high position and great wealth, or be hunted down by the whole world?" Wu Qi turned around and glared at Bai Qitian coldly, sneered and said, "What Daqin dynasty? I've never heard of it." After giving Bai Qitian a fierce glare, Wu Qi bowed his head and fled at the fastest speed. If not because he was intimidated by the brutal reputation of Bai Qi, the demon king of slaughter, Wu Qi would have definitely killed Bai Qitian right here. The problem was, the brutal reputation of Bai Qi was too frightening. Since Bai Qitian was already here, where would Bai Qi be? Wu Qi did not think that with Bai Qitian's insignificant strength, he would be able to cross Meng Mountains and come to a place only 400,000 miles away from Great Yan Dynasty. After becoming one of the influential nobles of Great Yan Dynasty, Wu Qi had learned a lot of information about Meng Mountains from Yan Bugui. It was definitely a mountain range of monstrous scale. Perhaps, it stretched for tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of miles. Over the last 2,000 years, Great Yan Dynasty had lost countless lives, and even several hundred of Jin Dan human immortals had fallen in this place. Yet, they still failed to find out the exact size of Meng Mountains. Bai Qitian was just a little human immortal of late Jin Dan stage. How could he cross Meng Mountains and come to this place with such a small group of people? Impossible, absolutely impossible. There must be someone even more powerful accompanying him. Who could it be? Bai Qi? Others? Or even? Upon thinking of those infamous figures, Wu Qi felt his scalp going numb. He absolutely did not want to kill Bai Qitian right now. Once he alerted those people behind him, he would be treated like a stray dog. A group of earth immortals of nascent soul realm, or even someone with even more frightening cultivation base, were chasing after him, a little earth immortal of void core realm. When Wu Qi thought of that frightening scene, he felt very pitiful, very pitiful. There was no need, as Wu Qi did not want to poke this hornet's nest. However, even if a man did not go looking for a hornet, the hornet would come looking for him. Not long after Wu Qi sprinted forward for a few miles, a few warriors, clad in black soft armors and treading on wing-shaped magical items, surrounded by a skinny, middle-aged scholar clad in a black robe, blocked his way. Almost instinctively, Wu Qi stopped running, fixing his eyes at the middle-aged scholar, who had a skinny face, dark skin, and a pair of deep sunken eyes. His gaze was glinting with a ghastly gleam, like that of a viper. Bai Qitian, who had been left far behind by Wu Qi, cried out joyfully, "Your Excellency Li Si, Prime Minister Li Si. Catch this guy. I don't know what kind of natural treasure he ate, but with the cultivation base of Xiantian realm, his fleshly body has already reached the indestructible body of an earth immortal of nascent soul realm. Both of my arms were broken by him." As if he had confirmed that Li Si could defeat Wu Qi, Bai Qitian, who had been chasing after Wu Qi madly, stopped running while gasping for breath, took out a bottle of pills and shoved it into his mouth. Both of his arms were trembling slightly, producing cracking noises. Obviously, his bones were healing quickly. Li Si. Wu Qi looked at the middle-aged scholar, who had his hands tucked under his sleeves and stood motionless like a great mountain. He cupped his fist, bowed and said hoarsely, "Senior, please make way for me. I don't want to have a falling out with all of you, so please don't push me too far." Rustling noises could be heard coming from all directions, as over 2,000 black-armored warriors emerged from the tall grasses and trees in all directions, surrounding them from a distance. Among about 20 black-armored warriors of Xiantian realm, one of them was a human immortal general of Jin Dan. Among these 2,000 warriors, there were about 100 human immortals from Jin Dan. Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath. He stared at Li Si and prepared himself to risk his life. Chapter 163. After quietly sizing up Wu Qi for a long period of time and waiting until the army of 2,000 soldiers had completely surrounded this area of about 1 mile in circumference, Li Si finally squeezed out a smile from his dry face. He cupped his fist toward Wu Qi, bowed solemnly and said, "My little friend, I'm Li Si, the Prime Minister of Daqin. May I know which sect are you from, and which dynasty is this place under? Wu Qi looked at Li Si, who had a serious expression on his face and was meticulous in his etiquette. He couldn't help but breathe out a long sigh. He lowered his head and looked at his naked body after the fierce battle just now. Then, he took out a change of clothes from his storage ring, smiled bitterly and asked, "Can you allow me to put on some clothes?" Li Si shook his head slowly. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, revealing a smile that made Wu Qi's blood run cold. Not good. Those who don't wear clothes, no matter it is their behavior, they will look unnatural. Even when they are fleeing, their speed will be reduced by about 20%. Since it can slow down my little friend's speed, why should I let you put on some clothes? With a malicious smile on his face, Li Si continued slowly, "Let's talk like this. We are all men here, so it's not a big deal for us to not wear clothes. Let's not talk about the etiquette anymore. We are in the wilderness, and the etiquette is a vulgar thing that should never be mentioned. It stinks." Wu Qi tightened his grip on the clothes. Once again, he breathed out a deep sigh. He looked at Li Si helplessly, while countless thoughts were flashing and spinning in his mind. Among them, there was even a plan of submitting to Daqin, leading them into Ji City and annexing Great Yan Dynasty. But suddenly, he thought of Lu Qingfeng, Yan Bugui, Yan Jiuhui, and Princess Xianglu. He even thought of the two personal serving ladies of Princess Xianglu, both of whom were the people of Great Yan Dynasty. His face darkened gradually. Unhurriedly, Wu Qi began to put on his clothes. Li Si's expression changed slightly, and he said in an indifferent tone, "If my little friend puts on another shirt, I'll kill you." Looking at Li Si, Wu Qi put on his clothes as fast as he could. "I've never seen a psychopath like you," he said coolly. "In order to prevent someone from escaping, you even forbid him from wearing clothes? If your children fall into my hands in the future, I'll strip them and throw them on the street, so that everyone can judge them. How dare you?" A black-armored warrior standing behind Li Si gave a furious roar, drawing his blade and thrusting it towards Wu Qi. The blade rose up into the air, and the black-armored warrior's body left behind dozens of afterimages. With a simple swing of the blade, he suddenly arrived next to Wu Qi. A large sheet of flame burst out from his body, and a flame several tens of feet long burst out from the blade as well, bringing with it a terrifyingly high temperature that could melt gold and iron. The blade thrust straight towards Wu Qi's neck. A deep, muffled explosion burst out from his body, as the massive fire element energy in the warrior's body was detonated by the innate fire element energy. Like a drop of fire sparks falling into an oil tank, the explosion went out of control. A deep, muffled explosion rang out, as the massive fire element energy in the warrior's body was detonated by the innate fire element energy. Like a drop of fire sparks falling into an oil tank, the explosion went out of control. Countless purplish-red flames burst out from all the pores on the warrior's body, instantly melting his body and turning his armor into a puddle of molten iron. In just a blink of an eye, a living man was burned into nothingness. Wu Qi held the blade tightly in his hand, weighed it in his hand, sneered and said, "An upper-grade magical item, a good item. The market price is 100,000 gold coins. I'll take it." Casually putting the blade into his storage ring, Wu Qi continued putting on his clothes. He did not even look at Li Si, who had a gloomy face. Taking a deep breath, Li Si said with a deep voice, "You've killed a warrior of Daqin, and you deserve the death penalty. Today, I sentence you to the grave crime of wiping out your entire clan." Dozens of warriors of embryonic breath Tier, Chi-Chi, let out a war cry. At the same time, a large sheet of flame burst out from their bodies, as they raised their blades and formed into a crescent moon-killing formation, charging towards Wu Qi. Wherever they went, the trees and grasses were turned into ashes, and even the dark soil was burned into a grayish-white clay by the high-temperature flame shot out from their feet. With just a single war cry, they had arrived next to Wu Qi at the same time. They raised their blades up high, but before they could hack down towards Wu Qi, who was in the middle of tying his belt, flicked his fingers, shooting out dozens of fire sparks and piercing into the bodies of these warriors. Once again, it was the innate fire element energy that detonated the fire element energy in these warriors' bodies. As they were proficient in fire element cultivation techniques, there was no way they could control the pure and brutal innate energy that contained a tiny bit of the natural law. Their innate energies quickly burst out like a bomb. Dozens of torches were set ablaze, and a purple-red flame burst out from the bodies of these warriors, turning their bodies and armors into nothingness at the same time. With a wave of his sleeve, Wu Qi threw the dozens of blades into his storage ring. He looked at Li Si, sneered, and said, "Thank you, thank you. Another few million gold coins. May I ask you, are you here to kill, or to give me gifts?" Li Si stared blankly at Wu Qi. His brows were twitching, and no one knew what he was thinking. Bai Qitian, who had just healed the wounds on his arms, cursed furiously, "What an audacious young man. I thought you were a talented man, and that's why I wanted to recruit you. But not only did you fail to appreciate my kindness, you even dared to kill my men. You deserve 1,000 deaths. Somebody, capture him alive, and torture him carefully." 20 early-stage Jin Dan captains left the troop and formed 2 small crescent-killing formations, pressing towards Wu Qi from left and right. 20 long swords transformed into 10 feet long beams of light and wheeled above their heads. Loud and clear noises kept coming out from the bodies of these early-stage Jin Dan captains. Obviously, they had been cultivating with a special body-strengthening technique, and were concentrating on controlling the energy in their bodies. Seeing that these captains were about to fight Wu Qi, Li Si suddenly cried out in a low voice, "Stop! Let me talk to him." Those captains turned a deaf ear to Li Si's words, and kept approaching Wu Qi. Bai Qitian raised his head abruptly and stared at Li Si. With a pair of bloodshot eyes, he said with a deep voice, "Prime Minister, I've been rude. This man killed my men, and I can't let him go. Once I capture him alive, I'll let you talk to him." Li Si gave Bai Qitian an indifferent look. Indifferently, he rolled up his arms and said, "Fine." Grinning coldly, Li Si brought a dozen men, who were clad in the same black robe and dressed like scholars, and slowly retreated several hundred feet back. Bai Qitian's eyes narrowed, then he stared at Wu Qi and cried out, "Crescent, kill." 20 sword beams fell from the sky with a shrill whistling noise. Although they seemed to be messy, but in fact, they were in perfect order, hacking towards the meridians and joints of Wu Qi's hands and feet. If he was hit by the sword beams here, Wu Qi would only lose the ability to move, but his life would not be in danger. Clearly, Bai Qitian's order to capture Wu Qi alive had been carried out perfectly by his subordinates. Meanwhile, the 20 Jin Dan captains, who were human immortals, leaped towards Wu Qi with deep, muffled whistles of wind breaking. After retreating several hundred feet back, Li Si suddenly cried out, "General Cheiji, have you forgotten? The Dharma body of an earth immortal is not something they can break." Before his words could fade away, miserable howls had already been heard. A 5-colored gleam flickered in Wu Qi's eyes, as he let the 20 sword beams fall viciously on his body. After that, the sword of greedy wolf let out a sonorous howl of a wolf, transforming into a cold beam that looked like a dark water wave and was dripping with water vapor, sweeping towards those captains. The sword beams let out a shrill cry, as they brought up a large number of sparks on Wu Qi's body before being knocked flying away by a tremendous force. Although these Jin Dan captains had cultivated the technique of body tempering, their bodies were still cut into halves by the sword beams, and they died on the spot. Casually, Wu Qi grabbed 20 thumb-sized Jin Dan weapons, which had yet to completely solidify, and were mixed with a faint golden gleam, in his hand. While laughing wildly, he forcefully kept the flying swords and armors of these captains into his storage ring. After that, a beam of yellow light burst out from the surface of his body as he plunged into the ground. Bai Qitian was caught unprepared by the tragic death of his elite captains. He stared blankly at the 40 pieces of corpses on the ground, then suddenly roared furiously, "Damn it! The Dharma body of an earth immortal. Even if a human immortal of Jin Dan wields a lower-grade magical treasure, he could never hurt it. This bastard! With a wild killing intent, Bai Qitian let out a loud roar and charged towards Wu Qi, thrusting the tiger-headed spear towards Wu Qi's chest while letting out a violent tiger roar. Wu Qi had exercised the escape art of earth, and half of his body had sunk into the ground. He stared coldly at Bai Qitian, who was leaping towards him. He fished out 3 purple gold talismans from his storage ring and gave Bai Qitian a strange smile. Casually activating the talismans, Wu Qi pointed the talismans at Bai Qitian, then plunged half of his body into the ground. All of a sudden, the 3 golden-purple talismans were set ablaze. A clump of dark cloud appeared out of nowhere in the sky. Accompanied by a deafening rumble, 18 golden thunderbolts, each as thick as a water bucket, came whistling down from the sky, bringing with them an aura of annihilation that seemed to be able to destroy everything. These were the 3 Night Golden Thunder Talismans, crafted by a human immortal talisman master from Heavenly Spirit sect. The power of each thunderbolt was equal to a full-force strike unleashed by a middle-stage Jin Dan cultivator. With 18 thunderbolts smashing down at the same time, even a late-stage Jin Dan human immortal with the protection of a magical treasure would not be able to withstand it. 18 thunderbolts struck Bai Qitian squarely on his head. The explosion charred his skin and made him look like a scarecrow blown by a strong gust of wind. He was thrown several hundred feet away like a scarecrow, howling and howling as he lay on the ground, unable to move even a little bit. Wu Qi let out a long cry, turned his head over his shoulder and gave Li Si a few provocative laughs. Apart from his head, his entire body had sunk into the ground. It was at this moment that Li Si struck. Slowly, he fished out a jade-colored scroll that was enshrouded in a golden glow and purple mist. Slowly, he unfolded it, then pulled out a writing brush made from some unknown material, which had a purple gold handle and a faint golden gleam. Casually, he wrote a character, mountain, on the scroll. With a casual flick of his hand, the character, which had just taken shape, flew out from the scroll. Dharma word, mountain, suppressing heaven and earth, cried Li Si. Following his cry, the natural energies within an area of 100 miles in circumference suddenly began to stir, while countless strands of earth Yuanling energy began to rapidly gather in his direction. In just a fraction of a second, a mountaintop, over 100 feet tall and over 1,000 feet in circumference, suddenly appeared above Wu Qi's head. A heavy and suffocating pressure came pressing down from afar, making Wu Qi's body sink, and his movement become a few times slower. Accompanied by a muffled swooshing noise, the mountaintop fell down from the sky, pressing down viciously towards Wu Qi's head. Looking at the mountaintop that was pressing down from above, Wu Qi gave a shrill cry with fear. Disregarding everything else, he exerted all the innate earth energy in his earth meridians and exercised the innate earth escape art with all his might, transforming his body into a stream of yellow earth energy and plunging into the ground. Rumble. A loud boom rang out. Right after Wu Qi plunged into the ground, the mountaintop smashed right on the spot where he was just a moment ago. The ground shook violently, and over 2,000 Qin soldiers in the surroundings were thrown off their feet, while those with slightly weaker cultivation base fell to the ground while coughing blood. Chapter 164. When Wu Qi was less than 100 feet into the ground, a tremendous force came smashing down on his head. His indestructible body, which was a few times stronger than that of an earth immortal of nascent soul realm, could only resist for a fraction of a second before he was nearly crushed by the tremendous force. Cracking noises could be heard coming from all over Wu Qi's body, and he was nearly crushed. Blood kept bursting out from his 7 apertures. The tremendous pressure was like a juicer, trying to squeeze everything out of his body. Wu Qi could still withstand the pressure of a small mountain. After all, Earth immortals of nascent soul realm had the divine ability to carry mountains and oceans. However, this mountain was not only extremely heavy, it also contained an enormous magnetic force of acquired Earth. This magnetic force had absorbed the soil within a circumference of 100 miles, connecting all the underground energy veins into one, and formed a tremendous force that pressed down on Wu Qi. An earth immortal of nascent soul realm could easily withstand the pressure of a large mountain, but when it came to a piece of land with a circumference of 100 miles, not to mention an earth immortal of nascent soul realm, even a heaven immortal who had cultivated his nascent divinity would not dare to be smashed by a piece of land with a circumference of 100 miles. The terrible weight of millions of tons could crush any ordinary immortal into pieces. Wu Qi coughed out 3 mouthfuls of blood. Abruptly, the silver lotus, which had a vague connection with his mind, shot out from between his brows, unleashing a large sheet of lotus petal-shaped light that enveloped Wu Qi's body, firmly protecting him within the stamen of the lotus. No matter how the tremendous force came crashing down from all directions, the silver lotus remained unmoved. Following Wu Qi's will, it brought Wu Qi's body and slowly sank into the ground. After absorbing the innate energies of 5 elements found in Wu Qi's energy veins, the silver lotus, which was originally a pure metal element, had gradually taken on a hint of innate energies of 5 elements. Therefore, it was able to use the earth escape technique to slowly sink into the ground. Earth-yellow light visible to the naked eyes was swirling rapidly in all directions, as if several dozens of Yangtze and Yellow rivers were rushing back and forth under the ground. A tremendous force of earth energy swept across an area of 100 miles in circumference. If Wu Qi's fleshly body was still in this land, it would have been crushed into the tiniest soil particles. The scroll and brush in Li Si's hands were unknown to him, and he didn't know what kind of secret technique he used. It was just a casual word, a sentence, but it had almost killed Wu Qi on the spot. Panting and coughing out mouthful after mouthful of blood, Wu Qi lay on the silver lotus with his eyes wide open. He raised his head and stared at the ground, which looked as if a Category 12 typhoon had just broken out, and cried out harshly, "Li Si, there is no enmity between us, but you've killed me so brutally. I will not stop until one of us is dead. So what if you are Li Si? So what if you are the Prime Minister of Daqin? So what if your cultivation is higher than mine? Didn't you also have 3 of your clans slaughtered by someone back then?" A valiant aura rose from the bottom of his heart, and the will to fight that belonged to Wu Wang rushed straight into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. He leaped up and roared furiously, "Li Si, I'm going to kill you. Ha, ha, just you wait, I'm going to teach you a good lesson." Panting and gasping, Wu Qi sat down on the silver lotus. For a moment, countless vicious and vengeful methods popped up in Wu Qi's mind. Wu Qi couldn't help but admire Lu Xiaobai, whose soul had fused with his own. How could she come up with so many vicious strategies? Wu Qi would never admit that some of these strategies were created by himself. It must be a strategy that only a heartless person like Lu Xiaobai could come up with. Gnashing his teeth, Wu Qi took out a healing pill and shoved it into his mouth, hastily treating the injuries on his body. After that, Wu Qi took out the 20 early-stage Jin Dan pills he had collected just now and threw them into his mouth. The quality of these Jin Dan pills was not high, and the amount of innate nectar in Jin Dan was very small. Therefore, all 10 false cores of Wu Qi could barely light up a little bit. On the contrary, the acquired innate energy of 5 elements, which he cultivated using the qi circulating technique of 5 elements in his main meridians, had shrunk to a degree that was a few times more flexible and dense than mercury. The innate energy in his meridians, which looked like a tangible substance, was rolling and rolling along with the sound of waves. Riding on the silver lotus, Wu Qi descended 100 miles, then flew away in a slanted direction. When he was at a distance of 100 miles, he let the silver lotus shield him and carefully crawled out from the ground. He chose a dark and dense forest and came out from it. With a gloomy face, Wu Qi retracted the silver lotus back into his spiritual ocean and took off all his clothes. From his storage ring, he fished out a set of dark green soft armor, which was commonly worn by secret agents of scouting office when they were out in the wild. Although the soft armor looked inconspicuous, it was actually a magical item of good quality. There were dozens of nested aura-concealing talismans made by the expert talisman masters of Heavenly Spirit sect on the soft armor, which allowed the wearer to run without stirring up any wind, and would never produce any sound of wind breaking. On top of that, it had the miraculous effect of concealing one's aura and hiding one's body. After putting on the soft armor, Wu Qi covered his entire head with a soft leather hood that came together with the armor. After that, he carefully tidied himself up, and put away all kinds of magical items that he might be able to use, especially the talismans he obtained from the 5 Jin Dan elders of Heavenly Spirit sect. After that, he carefully exercised the escape art of innate wood element and rushed towards the place where he was ambushed just now. Wu Qi had a bellyful of resentment in his heart. The reason why Elder Jin Dan elders of Heavenly Spirit sect were hunting him down was because he had ruined their source of wealth, and that was a personal grudge. Therefore, it was perfectly reasonable for them to seek revenge on each other. However, he did not know Li Si, Bai Qitian, or Daqin dynasty, and he had never had any dealings with them. Therefore, when Li Si and Bai Qitian attacked him abruptly and with a deadly strike, Wu Qi could not accept it. He had to get revenge, And he had to make Li Si and Bai Qitian suffer so much pain that they would never forget Wu Qi for the rest of their lives. Wu Qi clenched his teeth tightly, transformed his body into a wisp of green mist that looked like a ghost, and sped through the countless trees and grasses in the forest. While running at full speed, he was thinking in his mind. If not because he was 400,000 miles deep into Meng Mountains, where he could not mobilize the army of Great Yan Dynasty, he would definitely inform Yan Dan immediately, asking Yan Dan to assemble an army of several million soldiers and force Li Si and his men to stay in this mountain range. Surely, Yan Dan would be very willing to kill Li Si with the army of the entire dynasty. In the past, the Crown Prince of Yan Dynasty and the Prime Minister of Qin Dynasty must have had a lot of enmity between them. But too bad, he was now 400,000 miles deep into Meng Mountains. It was impossible for him to assemble an army here. The demon beasts and natural strongholds along the way were more than enough to devour any army. While running at full speed, all kinds of thoughts were tumbling in his mind. Carefully, Wu Qi came to the place where he was ambushed just now. Li Si and his men were still at the same spot. 20 campfires were burning fiercely, burning the bodies of 20 Jin Dan generals who were killed by Bai Qitian. Li Si was standing right next to the campfire, singing a funeral song with an ancient and desolate tune. His voice was sonorous and piercing into the clouds, making Wu Qi feel extremely uncomfortable. Carefully, Wu Qi crouched in the long grass between a few big trees, staring coldly at Li Si and his men. When the corpses of the dead generals had turned into ashes, Bai Qitian took out a few white porcelain jars and collected the ashes. While collecting the scorching hot ashes, he turned to Li Si and cried out resentfully, "Prime Minister, why didn't you strike earlier? You've caused me to lose so many of my subordinates. How am I going to explain this to my father later?" Wu Qi's heart sank. Judging from Bai Qitian's words, Bai Qi was indeed here. Li Si narrowed his eyes and kept staring at the darkening sky, as if he was having a mental journey. He did not give any explanation to Bai Qitian. Bai Qitian shouted angrily, but when he saw Li Si's expression, he had no choice but to shut his mouth obediently. Obviously, he did not have the courage to have a falling out with Li Si. Whether it was in terms of experience or position, he was too far behind Li Si. When Bai Qitian was done packing everything, Li Si came back to his senses and said coolly, "Let's go back to the camp. I wonder how many energy stones the others have collected during the past few days. If they are not enough, we'll have to stay here for a few more days." Li Si gave a glance at a small hill that was several hundred feet deep into the ground not far away, then said confidently, "Although you've lost some subordinates, I've also killed that little fellow on the spot. He was a lucky little fellow who possessed an indestructible body. The credit of killing him is equal to that of half an earth immortal of nascent soul realm. Although you've lost 20 Jin Dan soldiers, you've done nothing wrong. So, you don't have to be too calculative about it." Bai Qitian stared coldly at Li Si, sneered, and said, "This little fellow was killed by Prime Minister himself, so I dare not claim any credit. Boys, let's retreat and return to the camp. Send out some scouts along the way, and if we bump into any barbarian villages, we'll collect some energy stones along the way." Wu Qi, who had his eyes hidden behind the light green crystal mask on his head, nodded silently. Bai Qitian and his men were collecting energy stones. Very good, very good. The main group of Qin army slowly broke camp and left the place. Li Si, together with a dozen of his attendants, was the last to leave. Hiding his hands under his sleeves, he stared at the small hill that was several hundred feet deep into the ground. After a long while, he nodded and said, "He should be dead. He is just a little boy, so how could he withstand a single strike from me? He, disperse." With a wave of his sleeve, the small hill immediately transformed into countless strands of earth element energy and dispersed in all directions. Only then did the magnetic energy gathered by the small hill slowly disperse. A muffled boom that sounded like a thunderclap rang out from the ground, causing the surrounding trees and grasses to shake violently. Stepping on the wing-shaped magical items, the Qin army flew toward the west, while Li Si and his men were flying in the middle of the group. Wu Qi exercised his escape art and followed behind them, flying westward. Along the way, he saw several hundred barbarian villages that had been completely slaughtered. The fire in some villages had not been extinguished yet. Obviously, they had just been slaughtered and looted by the Qin army. When they passed by a lofty mountain, Wu Qi stood on top of the mountain and looked around. Using his spirit eyes, Wu Qi could see an area of several thousand miles from the lofty mountain. Within the circumference of several thousand miles, he saw many similar fires rising from many places. Obviously, the Qin army was slaughtering barbarians everywhere. In the southwest direction, because the fires in the villages had set the forest ablaze, an area of several hundred miles in circumference of the forest was ablaze. However, no one was there to deal with it. The conflagration sent smoke and dust soaring high into the sky, while a sorrowful and destructive aura lingered in the direction. Qin army, Qin army. Wu Qi's heart felt heavy. The barbarians in this place were truly unlucky. Their ancestors had escaped from the war blade of Great Yan dynasty, but now, they had fallen under the butcher blade of Qin army. In short, they were really unlucky. Following closely behind Li Si and his men, they flew over 5,000 miles westward. Surrounded by mountains, they came to a basin that measured about 100 miles in circumference. It was a flat grassland in the basin, densely packed with Chi-Chi's tents. Countless soldiers clad in black armors and stepping on wing-shaped magical items were gathering towards this basin from all directions. Wu Qi did a rough calculation and found that there were about 30,000 tents in this place. Judging from the size and scale of the tents, if each tent could accommodate 10 soldiers, there were at least several 100,000 Qin soldiers in this place. In the middle of the tents was a wooden city built with logs. Although the buildings were simple, they were still rather large. They stood in the middle of the wooden city. Above one of the palaces in the middle of the city stood a 200 feet tall flagpole, and on top of it was a black dragon flag, several tens of feet in circumference, waving menacingly in the wind. Shockingly, this was a field headquarters of Qin army. With just a cursory sensing, Wu Qi had sensed several hundred powerful auras hiding in this field headquarters, which made his heart tremble with fear. Each of these auras was exactly the same as the aura he sensed from Yan Dan. Chapter 165. From the wooden city in the middle, 4 groups of strange men, each clad in a long black robe and wearing a tall round hat, walked out slowly. They walked out from the 4 city gates of the wooden city and came to the 4 main gates of the campsite. A deep and powerful incantation was heard. Along with the incantation, the natural energies in the basin began to fluctuate chaotically. Through Wu Qi's spirit eyes, he could see the natural energies were disturbed into tiny energy molecules, mixing together in a messy manner like a pot of porridge that kept boiling. The ground was covered with long grass, and as Wu Qi possessed the escape art of innate wood element, he was like a fish in the water, sneaking into the campsite without alerting anyone. There was a mystic technique in Scroll of Stealing that allowed one to avoid these primordial runes. As the black-robed men who deployed these defensive mechanisms did not have a profound cultivation of primordial runes, Wu Qi was able to easily avoid several dozens of defensive mechanisms and sneak into the campsite. In this grand hall, they were just lowly serving ladies. Deep in the mountain, the sky turned dark quickly. Wu Qi was standing on top of a lofty mountain on the eastern side of the basin, looking at the distant horizon. The setting sun had not yet set, but the basin in front of him was already covered by the curtain of night. Torches were lit up everywhere, and a large group of soldiers were patrolling the campsite in a neat formation, guarding it so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. According to the Scroll of Stealing, when one cultivated these primordial runes to an extremely profound level, one rune could shatter a star, one rune could grow flesh and bones, one rune could bring a dead man back to life, one rune could change the world, one rune could even change the position of the stars. It possessed an unimaginably magical power. However, the Scroll of Stealing only recorded the method to deal with and decipher these runes. As for the cultivation method of these runes, there was only a chapter called Book of Ancient God, which made Wu Qi confused. With great effort, he calmed his surging emotions and restrained his aura. Using a mystic technique in Scroll of Stealing, he covered his entire body with innate 5 elements energies, merging his body with the 5 elements of the heaven and earth. Then, soundlessly, Wu Qi went straight into the last wooden palace. The defense of this wooden palace was extremely tight, as it was surrounded by defensive mechanisms made of primordial runes. There were a total of 300 Jin Dan human immortals guarding the palace, and even those serving ladies who were dressed in long black dresses and carrying basins and towels in their hands had the cultivation base of Xiantian realm. After pondering for a while, Wu Qi dived back into the ground and carefully made his way to the last palace. According to the layout of this place, the first hall should be used for banquets, the second hall should be the place where secrets were discussed, and the third hall should be the residence of the person with the highest status here. However, he did not know whether the person living inside was Li Si or Bai Qi. One of them was the Grand Marshal of the Central Plains, and the other was the Prime Minister. Could it be that they were sharing this hall? Amidst the chaotic energy porridge, a large number of spirit runes suddenly emerged and formed. These runes, which had all 5 elements, were connected from head to tail, and like agile snakes, they laid out several dozens of early warning mechanisms around, above, and under the camp. Once any living being touched these mechanisms, a loud noise and blinding light would burst out, which would be more than enough to alert the army in the camp. Some of these runes even contained frightening explosive energy. If someone touched these runes, the explosive energy would be more than enough to severely injure a human immortal of early Jin Dan realm. They were not old ladies who had taken some pills to maintain their youthful appearance, but teenage girls who were in the prime of their youth. This was what surprised Wu Qi. There were nearly 100 serving ladies here, and each of them was a young and beautiful teenage girl, possessing the cultivation base of Xiantian realm. In Ji City, the number of young men who possessed the cultivation base of Xiantian realm at their age that Wu Qi had seen, perhaps these were the most he had ever seen. The palaces in the wooden city were arranged in a straight line right in the center. The 3 palaces were the main palaces, and there were 3 side palaces on the left and right. Currently, the first main palace was brightly lit. Through the opened door, Wu Qi could see a long table that was neatly arranged. Some imperial eunuchs clad in black robes were carefully placing all kinds of tableware and wine vessels on the table. Some military officers, who obviously possessed the cultivation base of Jin Dan realm, clad in heavy armors, were patrolling outside the main palace. Wu Qi's heart was pounding rapidly, and the blood vessels on his temples were throbbing painfully. Wu Qi was panting heavily, and his eyes were glowing brightly. Carefully, very carefully, he peeked out a pair of eyes from underneath a candlestick with a complicated design in the corner of the main palace. Wu Qi looked towards the direction where the pressure was coming from. He saw a dragon bed, and a middle-aged man with a naked body and an emperor crown on his head was sitting upright on it. He, you are indeed a demon dragon who has almost become a heaven immortal. Ing Zheng has been too careless. This world is still not the place where Ing Zheng can look down upon. Primordial Talisman. Suddenly, Wu Qi's eyes shone brightly. Needless to say, the Book of Ancient God was an extremely precious scripture. Otherwise, it would not have been collected by that shadowy figure into the Scroll of Stealing and passed down. However, because it was too profound and magical, Wu Qi could not understand it at all. However, it seemed like these men in black robes before him had inherited a part of the Tao of Primordial Talisman. Perhaps, he could find a way to advance in the study of Primordial Talisman from them. A few serving ladies were soaking white silk handkerchiefs in hot water, wiping away the dirty blood that flowed out from the man's wounds. Obviously, he was exercising a mystic technique to heal himself. He gave a few loud laughs, then clenched his teeth and roared furiously, but sooner or later, this world will be under Ing Zheng's control. That demon dragon, I sentence him to have his entire clan executed, and all his clan members executed. However, for an elite army like the Qin army, it would not be a hindrance to them even if they did not have any rations or weapons in this forest that was rich in natural resources. There were no livestock sheds in the military camp, and all the soldiers had to fly in the sky with the help of those wing-shaped magical items. It was unnecessary for them to ride on their mounts in the forest. Therefore, if Wu Qi wanted to burn down the livestock sheds and cause a commotion, there was nothing he could do. The Book of Ancient God had a total of 36,000 words, and each of them was ancient and simple, emanating an aura that came from a long time ago. Each of the 36,000 words contained a profound principle of the heaven and earth, and possessed an incredible power. However, the shadowy figure who passed the scroll of stealing to Wu Qi had only focused on teaching him the main cultivation techniques, such as the 7 foundation establishment technique. As for those precious scriptures like the Book of Ancient God, which were obviously stolen by the shadowy figure, he had mentioned them, but he did not give any detailed explanation, nor did he give any cultivation advice to Wu Qi. It looked like a banquet was going to be held here later, and presumably, all the higher-ups of Qin army in this field headquarter would be attending the banquet. The Qin army headquarter measured several dozens of miles in both width and length, and was surrounded by a ring of mud walls, fences, traps, and trenches. Tens of layers of complicated fortifications had tightly encircled the entire field headquarter. Between the mud walls, fences, and trenches were several hundred watchtowers. Elite soldiers were stationed on top of these watchtowers, and ballistae and other weapons with powerful destructive force were deployed on top of these watchtowers. Although it was a field headquarter, the defensive strength of this barracks, together with those defensive runes, might not be any weaker than the defense of Ji City. A dragon roar was heard coming from Ing Zheng's body, as a clump of dark water vapor soared up into the sky. Amidst the water vapor were the shadows of 8 flood dragons and a horned serpent, wriggling crazily. A tremendous pressure that felt like it was a real substance came rushing at Wu Qi's face. It was as if he was punched in the face, and when the pressure struck his eyes, it gave him a severe pain and nearly caused tears to flow out from his eyes. Following that, a dozen serving ladies, who were carrying buckets made of pure gold, silver trays, and soft white silk handkerchiefs, walked into the hall. Wu Qi, who was hiding a few feet under the ground, immediately sensed a tremendous, vast, and endless pressure pressing down on his head. Carefully, Wu Qi poked his head out from behind a pillar and gave these serving ladies a glance. Who was the emperor of Daqin dynasty? Who should it be? Who could it be? The wound had nearly pierced through the chest of the middle-aged man, from his chest to his back. A few places on his body were pierced through, and light could be seen from the front to the back. From the wound, it looked like the claw of some huge beast had brutally scratched him. Vaguely, there was still a sticky demonic energy that one could see with naked eyes, and it was crazily corroding the man's body. Wu Qi did not pay any attention to the man's face. He just stared at the huge and ferocious wound on his chest with great shock. Wu Qi stared at these black-robed men with great astonishment. In Scroll of Stealing, there was a description about this method of stirring the natural energies and condensing them into restrictive runes out of thin air. It was a Tao of talisman that was completely different from the orthodox Qi refining cultivators. It was a system of Tao of talisman that was even more ancient than that of Qi refining cultivators, a system of primordial talisman that pointed directly to the Tao of using the natural energies. After a full 15 minutes, the man suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of dark blood. After that, he coughed violently and laughed out loud. Taking the opportunity when the soldiers were lining up and having their meals, and the sentries were changing shifts, it was inevitable that the campsite would become a little chaotic, and the vigilance would inevitably be weakened. Wu Qi's body had completely transformed into a clump of hazy green mist, moving along countless long grasses, and deftly sneaking into the campsite of Qin army. Shaking his head helplessly, Wu Qi secretly cursed the people who had made the Qin army so tightly organized, without leaving any loopholes for him to exploit. Then, he carefully sneaked into the wooden city located right in the center. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, Wu Qi came to the edge of the wooden city, which measured about 1 mile in both width and length. He came out from a remote corner of a wooden palace. He found nothing in the campsite. Apart from the barracks of soldiers, there were only the kitchen and toilets. Wu Qi roughly understood what was going on. In this place, most likely, all the provisions and armaments were carried by those powerful cultivators using storage magical treasures. Therefore, no matter what ideas Wu Qi had in mind, it was impossible for him to do anything to those provisions and armaments. Unless he could find those cultivators who were carrying the provisions and armaments, and steal their storage magical treasures. The pressure was not purposely unleashed at Wu Qi. Instead, it filled the entire hall at all times and in all directions. It was like a small sun. Without any deliberate effort, its light and heat would naturally radiate in all directions. When the Daqin dynasty met with them, it had given Wu Qi a pleasant surprise. The defensive strength of the headquarters was comparable to the defense of the capital city of Great Yan dynasty, and Wu Qi had no idea what to do next. If the headquarters was like this, what would the defense of the capital city of Daqin dynasty be like? Coldly looking at these black-robed men who had densely surrounded a barracks with various defensive runes, making it look like an impregnable fortress, Wu Qi sneered. Stealthily, he transformed into a green shadow and approached the campsite stealthily through the cover of countless grasses on the ground. A rich aroma of food was coming from the campsite in front of him. A large group of soldiers were lining up neatly and heading to the kitchen to get their meals. There was a special kitchen area in the campsite, as well as a large shed where soldiers could have their meals. The layout of the campsite was very reasonable, and it looked like a complete small city. While traveling underground, Wu Qi's body suddenly turned stiff, and he was struck dumb. He slapped his own head forcefully and scolded himself in his mind for being a pighead. Li Si was here, and Baiqi was here as well. Both of them had the same status, so how could they appear in the same headquarters? It could only be him. Their immediate superior was here as well, and that was the reason why they would come here with the identity of an entourage. The organization of the Qin army was very strict. When it came to having meals, changing shifts, and even going to the toilet, they would form groups of 10 to 100 men. Everyone in the groups were familiar with each other, and no one would leave the group without permission. Once a stranger sneaked into the group, it would immediately attract everyone's attention. After observing the pattern of the Qin army for a while, Wu Qi had no choice but to give up the plan of disguising himself as a Qin soldier and sneaking into the campsite. Using the escape art of Earth, he took a stroll around the campsite. Chapter 166. Su Fu still refused to leave, even though he found nothing after searching for a while. Like a vulture who had smelled the smell of rotting corpses but could not find any meat, he kept circling around the hall, his pair of glowing green eyes glancing around. When the old man entered the hall, Wu Qi immediately saw his pair of green eyes that looked like a ghost flame. There was a fine line in the middle of his pupils, dividing them into two halves. Both of them were shaped like the sun and the moon, emanating a strange cold gleam. According to the Scroll of Stealing, this pair of pupils was a mystic technique that only those practitioners of primordial runes could see through yin and yang, as well as everything under the heaven. It was a pair of eyes that could see through yin and yang, as well as everything under the heaven. In front of someone who possessed this pair of eyes, even those who had cultivated the breath control technique of Scroll of Stealing would have to be extra careful. The muscles on Ying Zhang's body were twisting and rolling at an incredible speed, while countless tiny granulation tissues were growing out from the huge, ferocious-looking wound on his chest. Drops of sticky, pitch-black demon energy were being forced out from the wound by an enormous amount of energy, turning into a pungent smoke that dissipated into the air. Ing Zheng's eyes went wide, his body trembling as he clenched his fists tightly, and kept letting out low and deep strange laughter. I swear I'll kill you. You are just a demon dragon, yet you refuse to offer your blood essence and soul to help me cultivate the 9 Dragons' Cauldron Grand Magic. This is a capital offense. After a while, Ing Zheng's body was finally cleaned. He lowered his head and looked at the wound on his chest, which seemed to have shrunk to the size of a hair. He shook his head angrily and said, "What a demon dragon, what a demon dragon. With just one strike, you have killed 30,000 of my elite soldiers, and even wounded me severely. When I've completed the first level of 9 Dragons' Cauldron Grand Magic, condense my dragon's soul and nascent divinity, and become a heaven immortal, I'll kill you and let me cultivate the second level of the cultivation technique." Therefore, Wu Qi closed his eyes, daring not to reveal even the slightest bit of divine gleam. He even held his breath and retracted all his aura, using a mystic technique to stop his heartbeat. All the functions of his body were almost in a state of dead silence. The innate Earth Yuanling energy enveloped Wu Qi, transforming him into an earth ball that looked exactly like a lump of soil and burying him under the ground. Ing Zheng was overjoyed. Is there such a thing? Do you know where that cultivator came from? Where did he come from? Which country is it under? Not to mention the loss of military strength, Ing Zheng's 2 bodyguards were supposed to be his stewards. When Ing Zheng traveled, he brought along a huge amount of energy stones, formation discs used to construct teleportation formations, and many other treasures. He wanted to keep in touch with the capital city of Xianyang at all times, so that he could receive the army and supplies at any time. To be able to communicate with Xianyang, which was hundreds of millions of miles away, the number of spirit stones and arrayed discs must be considerable. It would require a large number of storage artifacts to store them. Served by serving ladies, Ing Zheng put on the imperial robe and crown, then slowly rose to his feet. The dark mist in the great hall slowly fused into his body, and the shadows of 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent vanished without a trace. He took out a small purple gold bar and lightly tapped it on a jade bell hanging by the side of the bed. A clear and melodious sound of the bell immediately spread far away. Not long after that, a series of footsteps was heard. An old man with a short stature, thin face, clad in a black, wide-sleeved robe and a tall, round crown walked slowly into the great hall. At the same time, the scroll of stealing also warned Wu Qi that all the practitioners who had the qualification to cultivate this kind of dharma were those who had immersed themselves in the Tao of primordial runes for a very long time, and had a very profound cultivation base. Therefore, once Wu Qi bumped into them, he had to be extra careful, and if anything went wrong, he had to flee 10,000 miles away immediately. Otherwise, with the bizarre and powerful Tao of primordial runes, a slight carelessness could result in a serious injury or even death. The entire great hall was enshrouded by the dark mist, and the water vapor in the air was increasing rapidly. The bronze candlestick in front of Wu Qi was now fully covered with water droplets. Underneath the roof of the great hall, there were some faint electric arcs flashing, while the water vapor turned into dark clouds and rubbed against the ceiling, producing a faint rumbling of thunder. Ing Zheng was seen sitting cross-legged amidst the dark clouds and dark mist, while 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent were seen wheeling and wheeling in the dark mist behind him, emanating a matchless aura. The boundless murderous aura had condensed into a pressure that was as heavy as a mountain, so heavy that it almost materialized. Needless to say, Wu Qi was coveting the energy essence in Su Fu's eyes more and more, and his desire for the mystic eyes of universe grew stronger. Ing Zheng snorted heavily. After a long moment of silence, he said in a cruel and merciless tone, "Left and right Minister Feng Bao was useless, as he had lost all the energy stones and formation discs that I brought with me on this trip. They were killed by the demon dragons, and that's not a big deal. But their people had slaughtered 3 clans as a warning to the others. Minister Feng Bao, their duty is to protect my treasures. Their negligence this time is unforgivable. The old man walked slowly into the great hall, then with a solemn expression, he dropped to his knees and bowed deeply to Yingzheng. Your subject, Su Fu, offers greetings, Your Majesty. After a moment of silence, Su Fu said with a dry voice, that young cultivator killed 20 of the Jin Dan cavalry generals under the command of General Bai Qitian of Yulin Forest, and was trying to escape by escaping through the earth. His Excellency Li Si struck and killed him with the divine ability of spell conjuration. With his flesh and bones turned into mud, it is impossible to get a confession from him. It was also mentioned in Scroll of Stealing that if one could steal a thread of energy from the eyes of someone who cultivated this kind of eyes, it would allow the cultivation technique of spirit eyes to be greatly improved, and a pair of spirit eyes would have endless magical uses. If he could find some other precious materials, combined with a mystic technique in Scroll of Stealing called Mystic Eyes of Universe, Wu Qi's pair of eyes would definitely possess a power that could shake the heaven. Wherever the green light reached, the ground would turn transparent as well. From the ground all the way to 10,000 feet underground, everything had turned into a transparent object that shone with a faint green light. Hiding a few feet under the ground, Wu Qi could feel an indescribable, bone-piercing cold and extremely evil glimmer sprinkling down from the top of his head, nearly separating his body from the innate Earth Yuanling energy. As a supreme emperor, Yingzheng could never wear all 10 fingers full of storage rings like some nouveau riche. That was why he had left and right servants to carry and manage all these energy stones and spirit items for him. In the end, the demon dragon unleashed its mighty power and killed left and right servants, while all the energy stones and spirit items were taken away by the demon dragon. With that, Yingzheng and his company were basically trapped in Meng Mountains. That was indeed a very bad luck. Wu Qi shook his head gloatingly. Su Fu, on the other hand, stayed in the hall and did not leave. He walked around the hall a few times suspiciously, then suddenly opened his eyes. A large patch of dark green light shone from them, and he scanned the hall from top to bottom. Wherever the green light passed through, everything turned transparent. No matter it was gold and silver utensils, wood, soil, or rocks, everything turned into ripples and glazes. With a casual point of his finger, the dark light abruptly transformed into countless tiny dark threads, blotting out the sky and covering the entire grand hall, turning it into a sieve. After a full hour, the grand hall in front of him was filled with the sound of music and toasts. Only then did Su Fu stomp his feet and leave the grand hall with a cold smile on his face. But, he had only taken a few steps when he suddenly waved his hand. A strange black beam, measuring 1 foot and 3 inches long and several hundred times thinner than a hair, emerged on his finger. Yingzheng let out a few loud laughs, then strode out of the grand hall. While walking, he laughed wildly and said, "My dear subjects, please join me. Ha ha ha, today, Prince of Wuan has found several hundred beautiful barbarian girls, beautiful barbarian girls. My dear subjects, you have been working hard recently. Please join me, please join me. Somebody, play the music and start the banquet." Yingzheng's loud laughter gradually faded away, followed by countless loud and sonorous cries of "Long live," emanating shockingly strong energy ripples. Obviously, Yingzheng had brought an army of tens of thousands of miles to this place. Needless to say, he did not have any good intentions. However, he was cultivating with a certain divine ability, the 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic, which required him to plunder the blood essence and souls of flood dragons and fuse them into his own body. Only then could he keep improving his cultivation base. In Meng Mountains, they had met a demon dragon who had almost cultivated to the realm of heaven immortal. Therefore, Yingzheng had brought an army to slay the dragon excitedly. But, little did he expect that the overall strength of the demon dragon was too strong. Yingzheng himself was severely wounded, and his army was nearly slaughtered by the demon dragon. Wu Qi closed his eyes and shrunk his head 3 feet deep into the ground, relying on his sensitive ears to eavesdrop on the noises coming from above. He hesitated for a while, then with a green gleam flashing in his eyes, he said with a dry voice, "Xianyang is millions of miles away from here. Without some extraordinary treasures such as spatial breaching spirit gold as the core of the formation, the consumption will be too great. On top of that, the magnetic field in this mountain is chaotic, and the energy needed to break through the void has skyrocketed by 100 times. The energy stones I've collected now are not enough for me to communicate with Xianyang. Clenching his teeth so tightly that they produced cracking noises, Yingzheng continued to exert the energies in his body to force out the remaining demon energy in his wounds. The process went on for a full 15 minutes. Suddenly, a large amount of sticky sweat burst out from all over Yingzheng's body. He gasped for breath rapidly, then leaned back on the bed, feeling a little tired. Those serving ladies quickly came up to him, using hot water and silk handkerchiefs to wipe off the sticky sweat that came with a strange stench from his body. However, when Wu Qi looked at the soil and rocks around him that had turned transparent, he could not help but feel his heart tremble with fear. Su Fu's divine ability of Dharma eyes was truly frightening. Although Wu Qi had fused his innate energies of 5 elements into his eyes, he could only see a depth of a few feet deep into the ground. Surprisingly, this divine eye of Su Fu could actually see 10,000 feet deep into the ground, and its power was comparable to some unique spirit items. Then, he heard Su Fu say with an indifferent voice, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. Just now, Prime Minister Li Si met a cultivator, and judging from his appearance, he is not a barbarian living in this forest. Since that cultivator could appear here, it proves that this place is not far away from a populated area. As long as we can find their city, we can have as many energy stones and items as we want." Fortunately, the innate energies had endless magical effects. Although Su Fu's divine eye was strange and unfathomable, his cultivation base was still slightly weaker. The Yuanling energy that shrouded Wu Qi's body had almost flawlessly imitated the transformation of the soil and rocks around him, making Wu Qi's body turn transparent under the bright green light. Su Fu ran his eyes across the entire hall and the ground within 1,000 feet in circumference, but found nothing either. Su Fu rose to his feet and answered with a solemn voice, "Your Majesty, for the past few days, all the generals and soldiers have risked their lives to hunt barbarians and collect energy stones from all over the place. We have gathered 130,000 pieces of upper-grade energy stones, but the most important one, the supreme-grade energy stones, are only less than 3,000. If we are going to deploy a teleportation formation, we will need reinforcements from Xianyang City." Li Si. Yingzheng scolded fiercely, then burst into a loud laughter. "It doesn't matter, as long as we can find cultivators who are not from those barbarians, it proves that we are not far away from a populated area. No matter how far it is, as long as we can find a city, with my army of several 100,000 soldiers, we will be able to wipe out an entire kingdom. As long as we can deploy the teleportation formation, we will be able to bring reinforcements from Xianyang City here." Humph. With his hands clasped behind his back, Yingzheng looked at Su Fu and said coolly, "Rise. How many energy stones have you collected in the past few days?" He gave the hall a quick glance and did not find anything unusual. Then, he turned his eyes back to the ground. One was borrowing, while the other was controlling. The difference between them was like the difference between the clouds and the mud. Wu Qi stared at Yingzheng with great shock. At first glance, the 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent behind him looked very similar to the cultivation technique practiced by the beast warriors of Great Yan Dynasty. However, the beast warriors were only borrowing the enormous power contained in the beast souls for their own use. Unlike Yingzheng, the power of the 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent had completely fused with his body, and there was a tsunami of energy rocking in his body. All the power was under his complete control. Upon hearing Yingzheng's words, Wu Qi suddenly understood the predicament Yingzheng and his men were in. Chapter 167. The spring rain was silent, and so was the dark beams. They gently penetrated through all the furnishings in the hall, leaving behind countless tiny holes that could not be seen by naked eyes. After that, the dark beams pierced into the ground soundlessly, going 1,000 feet deep into the ground and bringing up wisps of dark smoke wherever they went. Several dozens of dark beams brushed past Wu Qi's body, and Wu Qi could smell a faint stench coming from the dark smoke. They had a very strong penetrating force, and contained a deadly poison. Carefully, Wu Qi used his divine sense to scan through one of the dark beams that flew past him. He discovered that it was actually the condensation of an extremely vicious acquired poisonous gas from the Earth's core, mixed with the aurora found in the sky and the aura of the dark night that came from the last ray of sunlight in the sky every day. It turned an intangible object into a tangible object, then from a tangible object back to an intangible object. The process was repeated a few times, and then mixed with several dozens of poisonous objects that could cause a great harm to the corporeal body and soul of cultivators. It was a vicious technique that was between a magical treasure and a divine ability. It was extremely powerful, and once it hurt someone, the consequences would be very serious. The corporeal body of ordinary earth immortals would be penetrated by it, and once infected by the poison contained in it, even the dharma body of an earth immortal would rot and disintegrate, and even his nascent soul would suffer a great harm. Such a vicious thing was recorded in the scroll of stealing, but this was the first time Wu Qi had seen something so vicious. Looking at the countless dark beams that had cleansed the entire hall, Su Fu frowned and shook his head. Am I really getting old? Why do I feel something is not right? TSK, something is still not right. Why do I always feel so nervous? He spun and walked 2 rounds around the hall. Suddenly, he stretched out his right index finger, and a tiny thread of dark beam quickly condensed into a strange, twisting rune. Then, he casually shot the rune into the ground. Suddenly, the ground under the great hall froze, turning from an ordinary soil to a texture as dense as steel. Clanging noises rang out as countless blades suddenly took shape under the ground. Bringing with them an eerie cold breeze, they swept and slashed in all directions, turning the ground into a mess. As the steel saber hacked down, a 10,000 meters wide ball of poisonous flame silently rose from tens of thousands of meters deep into the ground along with dense smoke, burning all the sand and soil in its way into a puddle of pitch-black lava. In the blink of an eye, apart from a little bit of soil on the ground that was still intact, the rock stratum beneath the main hall had been destroyed into a complete mess, and the grass on the ground had withered and died. At that moment, Wu Qi had sensed that something was amiss, so he had left the wooden city. Su Fu frowned and paced around the hall for a while. Only then did he feel reassured and nodded his head, clasping his hands behind his back and walking towards the banquet hall. At this moment, Ying Zheng's living hall looked exactly the same on the surface, but in fact, it had been badly damaged to the core. Many maidservants hurriedly ran back and forth, replacing the tools that were riddled with holes. They were extremely busy. Wu Qi was running very fast, and whenever something went wrong, he would immediately flee out of the city. However, although he was running fast, Su Fu's attack was even faster and more brutal. As a result, his escape beam was still swept by a thread of poisonous flame and dark smoke that burst out from the Earth's core. A large red mark was left on his right calf, and a thread of heat poison went straight into his internal organs. If it were any other ordinary cultivator, this heat poison that had been nurtured by the Earth's core for tens of thousands of years would be a huge problem. However, with a slight movement of the false core in Wu Qi's fire meridians, it absorbed all the heat poison, transforming it into innate fire energies that circulated throughout his body. Although Wu Qi was cultivating with a special technique that made him immune to the heat poison, his right calf was still burning with a burning pain. On top of that, he was nearly riddled with holes by the bizarre black needles. Wu Qi was so angry that his eyebrows were twitching, and he kept pointing his finger in the direction of the wooden city. Old fool Su Fu, the energy essence in your Dharma eyes will be taken by me, Wu Qi. Not only the energy essence in your eyes, but also the mystic technique of primordial runes you are cultivating, they will also belong to me, Wu Qi. This was the field headquarters of Qin army. Not only were there several 100,000 elite soldiers stationed here, it was also guarded by a large number of cultivators. Li Si, Su Fu, Ying Zheng, and a few others were all almighty experts with astonishing cultivation base. Therefore, Wu Qi dared not to underestimate Su Fu, and he dared not to strike hastily. He only had one chance to strike, and once he failed and alerted the others in the field headquarters, it would be very difficult for Wu Qi to escape. After pondering for a while, Wu Qi sneered and left the field headquarters, plunging into a nearby mountain. For the next 3 days, Wu Qi was running around in the woods in a hurry, purposely searching for those dark, desolate, damp, and filthy corners that were densely covered with poisonous mist and miasma. He had no idea how many strange and bizarre poisonous bugs he had caught, and how many strange poisonous herbs he had harvested. The scroll of stealing contained all kinds of knowledge, and it contained all kinds of strange and rare knockout agents and poisons. It was reasonable, as the secret chambers of those heaven immortals, gold immortals, and almighty experts would be guarded by their loyal disciples, divine beasts, and immortal beasts that they had tamed. Although the stealing technique of the scroll of stealing was the strongest under the heaven, it did not mean that their cultivation base was the strongest under the heaven. Most likely, the cultivation base of these disciples, divine beasts, and immortal beasts was much higher than Wu Qi himself. On top of that, cultivators would never fall asleep. Usually, they would sit in a meditative state for hundreds or even thousands of years. Under such circumstances, if Wu Qi wanted to sneak into the secret chambers and steal something, he would need all kinds of knockout agents and poisons. Among all the knockout agents recorded in the scroll of stealing, the one that Wu Qi could successfully concoct was the drunken dragon incense, which had over 780 formulas. There was a magical herb named drunken dragon grass under the heaven. Even if an ancient divine dragon were to consume it, he would be drunk for 1,000 years and lose consciousness. The drunken dragon incense mimicked the medicinal strength of the drunken dragon grass, combining all kinds of weaker herbs into one, and concocting a very powerful and overbearing knockout agent. In the scroll of stealing, the drunken dragon incense was ranked as the 9th tier of immortal grade among all the knockout agents in the universe, and was ranked 7th. It was one of the most common and commonly used knockout agents. Therefore, the number of formulas for drunken dragon incense was the highest, over 700 of them. After spending 3 days, Wu Qi was lucky enough to find all the poisonous weeds and poisonous bugs that could be concocted with 3 different formulas of drunken dragon incense. Carefully, according to the formulas, he processed all the poisonous weeds and poisonous bugs one by one, and finally concocted 3 different formulas of drunken dragon incense, then made them into 3 tiny threads. There was no conflict between the 3 formulas of drunken dragon incense, and they could be used at the same time. When the medicinal strength was stacked together, according to the description in the scroll of stealing, even an immortal or immortal beast of 36th tier heaven immortal realm would be knocked down to the ground after smelling it. Although it was not the strongest formula of drunken dragon incense, for the current Wu Qi, it was more than enough. The result of 3 days of hard work was 3 tiny threads of pale pinkish color, as thin as a mung bean, and measuring only 3 inches long. Wu Qi weighed the threads of drunken dragon incense in his hand, then let out a strange laugh. Without wasting any more time, he exercised his escape art once again and returned to Qin Army's field headquarters. When the night fell, Zheng and all his ministers once again held a grand banquet. Wu Qi waited until the banquet was over, then watched as all the people returned to their respective palaces to rest. It was obvious that Zheng had drunk too much today, as he was in high spirits. Wearing his helmet and armor, he brought 1,000 Yulan army and patrolled around the field headquarters for over 2 hours. Only when the moon was hanging high up in the sky did he return to Mu City, accompanied by Su Fu and Li Si. After Zheng settled down in the Great Hall and began to circulate his energy, only then did Li Si and Su Fu quietly leave Zheng's bedchamber. Outside the Great Hall, Li Si and Su Fu exchanged a glance, then went their separate ways with an expressionless face, entering 2 small side halls on the left and right side of Zheng's bedchamber. It was obvious that the relationship between Li Si and Su Fu was not very good. One was the leader of all the ministers, and the other was the leader of all the close ministers. It would be strange if they had a good relationship. Looking at the stiff relationship between Li Si and Su Fu, Wu Qi nodded his head silently. Carefully, he retracted all his aura, and before Su Fu entered the side hall, Wu Qi lit up 3 drunken dragon incense sticks in the largest and most spacious bedroom. Then, he carefully inserted the 3 incense sticks into the corner of the bedroom, then immediately plunged into the ground. The tasteless and odorless drunken dragon incense quickly spread and enveloped the entire bedroom. Outside the bedroom, Su Fu gave a few instructions to a few practitioners, then sent them away. After that, he clasped his hands behind his back and walked into the bedroom with a gloomy face. The door behind him moved on its own even though there was no wind, and quietly closed behind him. Frowning, Su Fu strode to the bed in the middle of the bedroom, took off his outer robe, and slowly sat down on the bed. A green gleam flickered in Su Fu's eyes, as he sneered and said, "Li Si, how dare you tell His Majesty that you found the location of a demon flood dragon, and that His Majesty can hunt it and complete the first stage of 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic? If I allow you to make such a great contribution, wouldn't my position in His Majesty's heart become weaker? Last time, I was the one who reported to His Majesty about that demon dragon." Shaking his head, Su Fu sighed and said, "I've caused His Majesty to be injured, and caused him to lose a lot of soldiers and generals. Although His Majesty doesn't take it to heart, if Li Si makes a new contribution, it will make him lose a lot of strength. Damn it, I've asked those useless fools to keep an eye on Li Si, but how could I let him find the demon flood dragon?" After muttering a few words in a low voice, Su Fu's eyes suddenly rolled up without any warning, and he fell heavily on the bed with his back to the sky. The back of his head knocked against the side of the bed, creating a loud and clear clang. It was a very shocking sound. However, as the bedroom was sealed by Su Fu with primordial runes, not a single sound could be heard from inside. Although there were several hundred black-robed practitioners on night duty outside, none of them knew what had happened inside. Hastily, Wu Qi leaped out from the ground and leaped onto Su Fu's body. Without saying anything, he unleashed all the restrictive spells he could from the scroll of stealing on Su Fu, sealing all the acupoints, meridians, spiritual ocean, dantian, and many other parts of Su Fu's body. Using both hands, Wu Qi pushed Su Fu's eyes open, brought himself before Su Fu's face, and aimed at Su Fu's eyes with his own. The mystic technique was activated. Suddenly, an extremely tiny and bright green whirlpool shone from the depth of Su Fu's eyes. A wisp of energy essence shot out from Su Fu's eyes at an incredible speed, shooting into Wu Qi's eyes like a misty smoke. A faint green gleam shot out from Wu Qi's eyes. The blood-red gleam in his eyes swelled up one after another, making his eyes as huge as a bull's, and nearly popping out from their sockets. Su Fu had cultivated his Dharma eyes for many years, and the energy essence contained in them was extremely huge. Although Wu Qi had only absorbed the energy essence for the span of 3 breaths, his eyes had nearly exploded, as they could no longer withstand the influx of energy essence. After stopping the mystic technique, Wu Qi stored the absorbed energy essence into the depth of his eyes. After that, he quickly removed the only storage ring from Su Fu's body, as well as some talismans made from some special materials hidden in his sleeves and belt. Using his divine sense, he gave the storage ring a glance and found 33 jade scrolls in it, with the word script of ancient law written on them. Countless abstruse runes could be vaguely seen on the surface of these jade scrolls. Obviously, these were the scriptures for the cultivation of primordial runes. Wu Qi was struck with great joy. Without hesitation, he transferred all the items in the ring into his own storage ring, then pulled out the sword of Greedy Wolf and thrust it forward. In just a blink of an eye, the sword had reached Su Fu's heart. Chapter 168. When the sword of Greedy Wolf was about to kill Su Fu, Wu Qi suddenly recalled the description of the practitioners in Scroll of Stealing. He quickly retracted the sword, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead due to the fear. Carefully, he untied Su Fu's shirt, and sure enough, he saw that his body was densely covered with several tens of thousands of strange runes the size of mung beans. These runes were twisting and roaring like some living creatures. Just by looking at them, Wu Qi could sense an extremely ferocious and brutal aura coming at him. This was the Blood Soul Curse. The deeper a practitioner studied into the primordial runes, the stronger the Blood Soul Curse would be. If a practitioner was killed by someone, the person who killed him or her would have to face the cruel revenge of the Blood Soul Curse. If this blood-soul curse was triggered by burning the practitioner's soul, the power of the blood-soul curse would be at least 100 times stronger than a full-force strike from the practitioner. As Su Fu had formed his nascent soul, a full-force strike from him was more than enough to turn Wu Qi's body and soul into nothingness. Cold sweat was breaking out from Wu Qi's body. When he thought of how he almost killed Su Fu, and how he was almost tricked by Su Fu's curse of blood-soul, his heart was twitching, and his legs were weak. The blood-soul curse was an extremely mystical curse, and it would never fail to take revenge on the murderer. Even if Wu Qi threw Su Fu into the nest of venomous bugs and let him be devoured by millions upon millions of them, the blood-soul curse would only be unleashed on Wu Qi. Faced with the densely packed curse runes on Su Fu's body, Wu Qi was like a hungry wolf who had seen a porcupine. Although he had the desire to kill Su Fu, he could not do it. The Tao of primordial runes was bizarre and ferocious, possessing an unpredictable power. Therefore, Wu Qi dared not to kill Su Fu. Flustered and exasperated, Wu Qi stared at Su Fu's body for a long while. Clenching his teeth, he raised up the sword of greedy wolf, but in the end, he still put it down. It was not worth risking his life. However, Wu Qi was unwilling to let Su Fu go just like that. Needless to say, Su Fu would be a formidable enemy of Great Yan Dynasty in the future, and he would also be a formidable enemy of Wu Qi. If they could kill him now, the pressure that Daqin would face on Great Yan Dynasty in the future would be greatly reduced. With a soft sigh, Wu Qi sheathed his sword and put away the 3 half-burnt incense sticks. Placing the incense stick on his palm, Wu Qi sprayed out a stream of true flame, turning all the incense stick into a wisp of thick smoke. Carefully, Wu Qi stuffed the smoke into Su Fu's mouth. With the thick smoke as a foundation, Su Fu would not be able to wake up for at least 3 months. Grabbing Su Fu, Wu Qi plunged into the ground with him. 4 hours later, Wu Qi brought Su Fu and arrived at the bottom of the huge river. Amidst the rolling waves, Wu Qi brought Su Fu along with him, drifting westward along the river. After traveling for over 3,000 miles with the current, Wu Qi found a water nest, which was occupied by a huge demon carp, underneath a patch of black rocks in the middle of the river. It was an underwater nest with an entrance of 30 feet in circumference, but tens of miles in size inside. On top of that, there was a front hall, a side hall, a bedroom, and a backyard. Obviously, this demon carp had spent quite a lot of effort in building this place. However, this demon carp was just a demon carp that was about to form its Jin Dan. Although it had developed its own intelligence, Wu Qi did not pay any attention to it. Then, he used a sword beam to kill the demon black carp, storing its huge body as food. After that, he sealed off the entrance of the cave and deployed a few formations that could conceal his aura. After that, he began to drain all the water in the cave abode. As he was not in the mood to take care of the cave, Wu Qi threw the unconscious Su Fu to the ground, then sat down next to him. Immediately, he began to temper his eyes according to the technique of the mystic eyes of universe. He kept performing one bizarre incantation gesture after another. His eyes were shrouded in a bizarre mist, and in just a blink of an eye, his eyes were covered with a strange glow, which he could not tell what color it was, but it seemed to contain 7 different colors at the same time. The mystic eyes of universe was an ancient divine technique. It was said that once mastered, one would be able to see through the entire 9 heavens and 10 earths. Wherever the divine eyes looked, they could see through all illusions and formations, and would not be confused by any bewitching magic. However, the cost of cultivating the mystic eyes of universe was enormous. It required all kinds of acquired spirit treasures and innate spirit essences to fuse into the eyes, constantly tempering them. Every time a spirit essence was fused into the eyes, the power would increase by 1 level, and the increase in power was nearly endless. At this moment, while Wu Qi was digesting the spirit essences he absorbed from Su Fu's eyes, he also fused the innate energies of 5 elements into his eyes, which gave his eyes the ability to attack with innate 5 elements. Then, he separated a thread of energy from the body of the 7 holy deities and devils, fusing it with his eyes, giving his eyes the ability to attack with the mind. In the future, when his eyes were strong enough, he could also fuse the innate divine flame, such as the divine flame of order, into his eyes. With that, his eyes would be able to shoot out the divine flame of order to attack his enemies, which would make the power even greater, mysterious, and unpredictable. 6 hours later, the spirit essences he absorbed from Su Fu's eyes were completely digested by Wu Qi's eyes. His eyes, which had a clear distinction between black and white, were now glinting brighter and brighter. The white of his eyes looked like silver, while his pupils looked like black crystals. The contrast between black and white was extremely sharp, emanating a sharp aura that no one could look straight at. The medicinal strength of the drunken dragon incense could not keep Su Fu unconscious for a long period of time. As time was limited, Wu Qi did not waste any time. He pried open Su Fu's eyes and absorbed a thread of spirit essences into his own eyes. This time, Wu Qi's eyes had gone through a tremendous change, as the amount of spirit essences they could hold was at least 10 times greater than before. After that, he spent over 4 hours to completely digest this thread of spirit essences. Half a month later, Su Fu's green eyes had turned dim and lifeless. His Dharma eye's divine ability had been destroyed by Wu Qi, and all the years of arduous cultivation had gone down the drain. On the other hand, Wu Qi's eyes were glowing with a strange gleam, with layers upon layers of clouds constantly changing within them, becoming extremely profound and abstruse. The mystic eyes of universe was even more mysterious and mystical than Su Fu's yin and yang Dharma eyes. Currently, when Wu Qi stared with his eyes, his gaze could pierce through the surface of the river and look at the sky over 100 miles high. The strange gleam in his eyes swept across the ground. Wherever the gleam passed through, the sand and soil 3,000 feet deep would turn as clear as water. All sorts of bugs living in the sand and the strange beasts living underground could no longer hide from Wu Qi's eyes. What was even more miraculous was that, wherever Wu Qi's eyes passed through, all the natural energies contained in everything would be glistening brightly in his line of sight. According to the nature and quality of the natural energies, they would be of varying brightness and darkness. Wu Qi's eyes had nearly become the best appraisal instrument. With just a single glance, he could see through any ordinary precious treasures produced by the heaven and earth. After throwing his head back and letting out 3 loud laughs into the sky, expressing the boundless joy in his heart, Wu Qi took out the script of ancient law. The word ancient represented the meaning of the primordial era, while the word law represented the meaning of the Tao of the heaven and earth. The script of ancient law was a scripture that recorded the research of the primordial magicians on the nature, their understanding of the heaven and earth, and the laws of the heaven and earth. From the most basic energy of the 5 elements of the heaven and earth, to the most abstruse laws of life and death, and the Tao of yin and yang, all of them were described in detail in these 33 jade scrolls. Wu Qi briefly flipped through the script of ancient law. The Tao of primordial runes recorded in this scripture could allow a mortal to cultivate all the way to the realm of heaven immortal. After reaching the realm of heaven immortal, it would be a blank slate. However, with the foundation of the Tao of primordial runes, Wu Qi would be able to study and cultivate the Book of Ancient God found in Scroll of Stealing. It was a primordial scripture that could allow one to cultivate all the way from the realm of heaven immortal, pointing straight to the origin of the world. The Book of Ancient God was a true cultivation scripture of primordial treasure grade, and the script of ancient law was the key to unlock this secret treasure. After comparing the various runes and mystic techniques found in the Book of Ancient God with the script of ancient law, Wu Qi could not help but let out a loud laugh once again. The sword technique of heaven-breaking sword sect was a magical technique used to fight against cultivators using flying swords and magical treasures, while the script of ancient law and Book of Ancient God were divine abilities and mystic techniques that could allow one to establish one's life and see through the secrets of the heaven. If a cultivator wished to have a great achievement, both magical techniques and divine abilities were indispensable. Now, Wu Qi did not lack any magical techniques or divine abilities, and he even had the solid foundation laid by the Scroll of Stealing. How could he not be happy? It was different from the cultivation technique of ordinary qi refining cultivators. Ordinary qi refining cultivators collected natural energies, tempered their corporeal bodies and bones, accumulated innate energies, and formed their Jin Dan nascent souls. On the other hand, the practitioners who studied the Tao of primordial runes did not attach much importance to their corporeal bodies. What they focused on was comprehending the secrets of the heaven and earth, strengthening the source of their soul, strengthening their nascent divinity and divine sense, and communicating with the heaven and earth with the powerful soul energy. That was why they could topple the mountains and overturn the seas, and change the stars with just a single rune. In other words, cultivators cultivated their chi, while practitioners cultivated their spirit. Both sides had their own emphasis, and each had their own advantages and disadvantages. Now that Wu Qi was cultivating both his chi and spirit, even he himself did not have an exact estimation on how many benefits it could bring him. In any case, Wu Qi began to cultivate the script of ancient law, and began to study all kinds of runes and mystic techniques. After he had fused with Lu Xiaobai's soul particles, his abnormal IQ had played a great role. Ordinary magicians might not be able to comprehend the runes even if they tried to comprehend them for several years, but he only needed 2 to 3/4 of an hour to comprehend them. The most difficult part of studying the Tao of primordial runes was that it required one to gather a very powerful soul energy. The stronger the soul, the faster one could comprehend the runes, and the more powerful the offensive power of the runes would be. Without spending a long period of time, it was impossible to form a powerful soul. However, Wu Qi still had Su Fu, a human-shaped great tonic right next to him. Using the silver lotus as the medium, Wu Qi forcibly split Su Fu's soul with the divine flame of order, refining the source of his soul into the most basic soul particles and fusing it with his own soul. With that, the cultivation of his soul progressed at a tremendous pace. In just a few days, his soul had become about 10 times stronger than before. Only the pitiful Su Fu was left. Day and night, he had to suffer the pain of soul refinement by the divine flame of order, and from time to time, his soul would be cut by the silver lotus. The pain made him twitch and jerk like a fish out of the water, slapping the ground and producing loud popping noises. Another month later, 70% of Su Fu's soul energy had been refined and absorbed by Wu Qi. At the same time, Su Fu was almost at the end of his rope. If he continued to refine his soul energy, it was highly possible that his soul would be completely destroyed, and the curse of blood soul in his body would be triggered immediately, giving a deadly blow to Wu Qi. Left with no other choice, Wu Qi finally gave up on Su Fu. Looking at Su Fu, whose body had shrunk to one size, Wu Qi stuffed a few life-saving spirit pills into his mouth. After that, he sneakily sent Su Fu back to the field headquarters of Qin army, which was a few times more heavily guarded than before. After sending Su Fu back to his bedroom, Wu Qi snuck out from the Qin army's campsite stealthily. After that, he threw his head back and roared into the sky, "Li Si, the Prime Minister of Great Qin, I send my greetings to your mother." Then, he pointed his right hand out and waved it, unleashing a rune that twisted and looked like a lightning bolt, falling forcefully into the sky above the Qin camp. Suddenly, thousands of tiny electric arcs shot down from the pitch-black sky. Countless thunderbolts streaked across the sky above the Qin camp, and immediately, the surroundings were thrown into chaos. From the wooden city located right in the center of the field headquarters, the shadows of 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent soared up into the sky, while Ing Zheng's loud cry shook the surrounding mountains and caused half of them to crumble. "How dare you insult me, the Daqin?" Wu Qi had long fled over 100 miles away from the scene. He stood on the peak of a lofty mountain, looking at the mountains that were crumbling crazily around the field headquarters of Daqin. Suddenly, he let out a long and sonorous cry, which sounded like a thunderclap and echoed out to a distance of several hundred miles, "Li Si, I'll fight you to the death." Chapter 169. Inside the cave, a strange gleam flashed across Wu Qi's eyes as he slowly breathed out a long sigh of relief. It had been 7 days since he sent Su Fu back. During these 7 days, the Qin army was like a swarm of hornets whose nest had been burned, searching for the enemy in every direction. They had thrown the woods several thousand miles in circumference into a complete mess, and countless barbarian villages were discovered by the furious Qin army. All the barbarians were slaughtered, and all their belongings were looted. The sky was filled with smoke and dust during these few days. It was the thick smoke that rose from the burning of the barbarian villages and the nearby woods. During these 7 days, Wu Qi had concocted a few new drunken dragon incense, trying to give the leaders of the Qin army a hard lesson. If possible, he even wanted to get some benefits from Ing Zheng. But too bad, the higher-ups of the Qin army who had increased their vigilance did not give him any chance. Ing Zheng and his men were all carrying various dust-repelling and poison-repelling pearls, so the smoke of the drunken dragon incense could not even touch their bodies. Therefore, it was useless. Wu Qi had also tried to poison the wine and dishes, but as Ing Zheng and his men had attained the cultivation base of nascent soul realm, they simply refused to eat, drink, or breathe. No matter what strange and bizarre methods Wu Qi used, he still could not do anything to them. There was one time when Wu Qi sneaked into Li Si's bedroom and poisoned the tea. As a result, he was nearly ambushed by the army led by Ing Zheng and captured alive. Fortunately, when Wu Qi realized that something was not right, he immediately fled underground, and that was how he managed to escape from the disaster. After that incident, Wu Qi dared not to enter the Qin army's field headquarters again. He could only patrol around and see if he could find an opportunity to strike. In the end, after he ambushed a few small detachments of Qin army and looted a batch of energy stones, the Qin army simply shut themselves in and refused to come out, guarding the entire field headquarters so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Such a shameless method had left Wu Qi with no idea what to do. He could only look at the Qin army's field headquarters and smile bitterly into the sky. The moonlight was bright and beautiful tonight, and a round moon hung high up in the sky. The moonlight on this day was exceptionally dazzling. The greenish-white moonlight poured down from the basin-sized moon like flowing water, sprinkling the cool moonlight essence on people's bodies. Wu Qi walked out of the cave he was hiding in and took a deep breath. Thick smoke, a large amount of dust, and the cool essence of the moon were sucked into his body. Wu Qi coughed violently. Standing at the top of the mountain and looking around, there were big and small fires everywhere. The forest was burning, and the fire made the moonlight in the sky dim. The army of Qin had been wreaking havoc in all directions these days. Red flames were reflected in the sky, giving the heaven and earth an aura of doomsday, as if a calamity was about to descend. Shaking his head, Wu Qi's body turned into a beam of yellow light and drilled into the ground. During the past few days, many forests in the surrounding had been burned down. Without the cover of trees and flowers, he could not use the escape art of innate wood element. Thus, the escape art of earth had become the only choice for Wu Qi. Cautiously, he poked half of his head out from the edge of the Qin army's campsite. Then, Wu Qi saw a chariot pulled by 8 black horses coming out from the main entrance of the Qin army's campsite, and the man standing on the chariot was none other than Ing Zheng. The chariot was driven by 3 burly warriors, each standing 10 feet tall with their upper bodies bared. Each of them had a skin that looked like it was forged from bronze, glinting with a cold gleam under the moonlight. Standing next to Ing Zheng on the left was Li Si, whose face had turned green, and on the right was Su Fu, who looked haggard and had his vitality severely damaged. During the past few days, Wu Qi had been harassing the Qin army's campsite, saying that he was going to seek revenge from Li Si. Because of this, Ing Zheng flew into a terrible rage, scolding Li Si a few times in front of all his ministers. Even Bai Qitian, who had offended Wu Qi, was implicated by Ing Zheng as well. How could Li Si, who swore confidently that he had killed Wu Qi, have a pleasant expression on his face? Su Fu, on the other hand, had his Dharma Eye energy essence completely seized by Wu Qi, and 70% of his soul source energy was seized by Wu Qi. But at this moment, there was a faint green gleam shining in Su Fu's eyes, and his face looked slightly flushed. It looked like he had actually recovered a small part of his lost energy. A greedy gleam shone in Wu Qi's eyes, and he gave Su Fu a fierce glare. Obviously, Ing Zheng had spent a great deal of his capital, using some kind of rare and precious natural treasures to restore Su Fu's lost energy essence, strengthening Su Fu's foundation, and that was why Su Fu was able to recover his cultivation base in just a short 7 days. Surely, Ying Zheng had some good stuff with him. Wu Qi frowned, wondering how he could get his hands on these treasures. Apart from Ying Zheng and his men who were riding on the chariot, there were 400 black-robed practitioners accompanying them, and each of them had the cultivation base of Jin Dan realm. There were also 800 Yulin army and stalwart tiger army from Daqin dynasty, all of whom had the overall strength of Jin Dan realm. Among these black-robed practitioners, there were several dozens of them who emanated an aura that made Wu Qi feel fear. They should be earth immortals of nascent soul realm. Meanwhile, standing in front of those Yulin army and stalwart tiger army were nearly 100 captains. Each of them looked very valiant, and the aura emanating from them was so strong that it made Wu Qi's hair stand on end. Among them, the general who stood closest to Ying Zheng's chariot was riding on a double-horned white qilin. According to what Wu Qi had seen and heard in the last few days when he sneaked into the Qin army's campsite, he was the current Grand Marshal of Daqin dynasty, Wang Baiqi of Wu'an City. Standing 9 feet tall, Baiqi's skin was slightly dark, and he had a square face that gave him an imposing aura. He was clad in 3 layers of heavy armor, all of which were rare mid-grade magical treasures, and possessed an amazing defensive strength. Following right beside Baiqi were his sons, Bai Qitian, the commander of Yulin army chariot, and Bai Qiming, the commander of stalwart tiger chariot. What a valiant and arrogant army! Wu Qi shook his head. He had no idea if Great Yan dynasty still had some hidden trump cards. However, judging by the military strength displayed by Daqin today, just these 100 earth immortals of nascent soul realm were more than enough to wipe out Great Yan. Unless Great Yan dynasty had enough hidden forces, once Ying Zheng left Meng Mountains and came to Great Yan's territory, the fate of Great Yan dynasty would be hanging by a thread. Sigh, don't worry about the ancient people. Yan Dan was killed by Daqin once, and I don't think he will mind if he dies again. I just want to protect the people I care about. The faces of Meng Xiaobai, Lu Qingfeng, and Princess Zhang Lu flashed before Wu Qi's eyes. Wu Qi twitched his lips, exercised an escape art, and caught up with Ying Zheng and his company, who were leaving the campsite in the middle of the night. The army marched through the woods at a fast speed. Cast by those practitioners, a thin layer of cloud had shrouded the army, preventing them from making any sound when they were marching. No matter if it was a cliff or a deep valley, the army could just fly past them without encountering any obstacle. In just over 2 hours, when it was almost midnight, Ying Zheng and his company came to the bank of the Great River, and traveled along the Great River for over 6,000 miles eastward. The Great River had fused with the water from 3 other tributaries here, and as the 3 tributaries flowed into the Great River almost at the same place, the water area here was very wide, and a huge lake with a circumference of nearly 3,000 miles was formed amidst the mountains. Standing on the peak of a lofty mountain, Wu Qi looked down at the lake. The main stream of the Great River was like a great dragon, rushing from east to west, while the 3 smaller tributaries were like 3 great serpents that plunged over from the distant horizon, plunging into the embrace of the great dragon. As the 4 tributaries collided with each other, the current of the lake was extremely treacherous. Even though there was no wind blowing, there were still several tens of feet tall waves rocking, and there were even whirlpools that could be vaguely seen under the surface of the water, producing loud crashing noises from time to time. At this moment, the moon was about to rise to the center of the sky, and it was almost midnight. Suddenly, the surface of the lake began to sparkle, as countless aquatic demon beasts, such as fishes, shrimps, crabs, and many others, came out from under the water and floated on the surface, opening their mouths and staring blankly at the sky, waiting to absorb the essence that was sprinkled down from the full moon when the moon rose to the center of the sky, which could transform all demon beasts thoroughly. The night of the full moon was an extremely important moment for all demon beasts, and none of them would want to miss out on this day. From a dense forest halfway up a lofty mountain, Ying Zheng's voice was heard faintly coming. Last month, because of the disappearance of Su Fu, the field headquarters was thrown into chaos, and that's why we couldn't come here to capture that flood dragon. Tonight, we can't afford to fail. Once I've subdued that flood dragon and attained the first stage of the 9 Dragons Cauldron Heaven cultivation technique, I'll be able to attain the righteous fruit of Heaven Immortal, and all of you will be credited with your contribution. As for that little rascal who has been harassing the field headquarters for the past few days, once I've accomplished the task, I'll definitely crush his bones and scatter his ashes, and wipe out his entire clan. A mountain breeze came blowing from the surface of the lake, and Wu Qi felt a cool breeze coming from all over his body while lying on a rock. His ears and eyes were very sharp now, and Ing Zheng's voice was very loud and clear. Therefore, he could hear every single word clearly. Suddenly, he recalled the day when he kidnapped Su Fu. Did Su Fu say that Li Si had found a flood dragon? The cultivation technique cultivated by Ing Zheng required the blood essence and soul of a flood dragon as a supplement. It looked like they had suffered a loss in the hands of a demon dragon of Heaven Immortal Realm, and today, they were going to find this flood dragon to vent their anger. Ing Zheng was going to break through the realm of Heaven Immortal with the help of the flood dragon's power? Wu Qi shook his head. How could he let such a good thing succeed? But, what should he do to ruin Ing Zheng's plan? Wu Qi could not help but frown as he watched Bai Qi instruct all the soldiers to deploy a formation on the mountainside that was emanating a murderous aura, and saw those black-robed practitioners deploy many vicious restrictive spells on the mountainside. Step by step, the moon was sliding toward the middle of the sky, and the number of demon beasts on the surface of the lake was increasing. The stronger the demon beasts were, the later they would appear. The stronger the demon beasts were, the larger their bodies were. Therefore, the demon beasts that appeared now were rising up from the surface of the water like small hills, causing the already billowing surface of the lake to become even more turbulent. Huge waves kept slapping onto the huge rocks on the shore, and the rumbling of the waves could be vaguely heard from over 1,000 miles away. Right at the moment when the moon was about to reach the center of the sky, a giant catfish, over 3,000 feet long, suddenly leaped out from under the water, and with a single swipe of its tail, it smashed two demon crabs, a male and a female demon crabs. Both crabs measured over 100 feet in circumference, and they were demon immortals with a very profound cultivation base. But, with a swipe of the giant tail of the catfish, their tough bodies were crushed into pieces like tofu. Originally, catfish had a smooth and sticky body, and no scales. However, when this fierce catfish leaped out from the water, its body was densely covered with a layer of black scales the size of a water tank. Furthermore, they were pentagonal scales that were very different from ordinary fish scales, and the edge of the scales was inlaid with a tiny golden edge, which gave it a very beautiful appearance. The long whiskers on the corner of the catfish's mouth were 6 flood dragon whiskers, each 1,000 feet long and glittering as if they were made from pure silver. There was also a dragon horn on the top of its head, a pitch-black dragon horn that looked like the antlers of a deer, crystal clear and divided into 8 forks. When this giant catfish leaped out from the water, gusts of chilly wind immediately rose from all directions, and a thick layer of watery clouds wrapped around its body, with lightning flashing vaguely in the clouds. Lying on the dark clouds, the catfish raised its upper body and faced the moon lazily. Then, it suddenly opened its mouth and took a deep breath towards the moon. Half of the moonlight on the surface of the lake, which measured 3,000 miles in circumference, was sucked up by this catfish. All the other demon beasts roared and roared crazily, cursing furiously at the catfish, then left the catfish angrily. If they could not absorb even a tiny bit of moonlight when they were around it, wouldn't that be a waste of an opportunity? However, the catfish did not pay any attention to the protests of the other demon beasts. It just kept absorbing the moonlight essence in the sky comfortably, while a bright glow flashed and flickered around its body. Suddenly, 4 dragon claws poked out from underneath its body, grabbing wildly in all directions while producing swishing noises. 2 huge water snakes, each measuring over 100 feet long, were caught by its claws, and swallowed into its stomach without even chewing. Wu Qi's eyes lit up when he saw this. What a ferocious and powerful flood dragon! However, it was really rare to see a flood dragon transformed from a catfish, and its appearance was really strange. He gave a malicious look at Ing Zheng, who stood halfway up the mountain not far away. Catfish, are you going to take me or not? Chapter 170. Wu Qi stared greedily at the catfish flood dragon's body. If he could obtain a part of her blood essence, the benefits he could get would be greater than what Shi Tianma and his son could give him. Abruptly, the catfish flood dragon opened her mouth, which measured several hundred feet in circumference, and thrust towards Yingzheng with a frightening suction force. The surrounding air and the lake water turned into several dozens of waterspouts, rolling and rolling into the catfish flood dragon's mouth. For a moment, a strong gust of wind roared across the surface of the lake, while catfish flood dragon's eyes shone with an eerie blue gleam. Like two searchlights, they penetrated through the watery mist for several miles and locked onto Yingzheng's body. Yingzheng let out a complacent laugh, then waved the long spear in his hand and smashed it down towards the catfish flood dragon's head. Far away on the surface of the lake, the catfish flood dragon had absorbed the essence of the full moon tonight, and had eaten 2 large dark fishes to fill her belly. She was now excitedly flipping her body on the surface of the lake, exposing her white and plump belly to the moonlight. Her 4 claws were gently scratching her belly, producing deep, muffled noises that sounded like the rumbling of thunder. The noises could be heard thousands of miles away, and all the demon beasts on the surface of the lake dared not to make any noise. Meanwhile, Catfish Flood Dragon had given up on Bai Qi and the others. She opened her big mouth and sprayed out countless pitch-black water-in thunders, smashing towards Yingzheng's face. Then, she coiled her body and charged towards Yingzheng. At the same time, the Catfish Flood Dragon roared out loud, "All of you, attack! These are all nascent soul cultivators who have cultivated to the realm of Earth Immortal. Eat their flesh and blood, and it will greatly nourish your energy. It belongs to whoever gets it. Whoever kills the most people will be the second leader of the Lake of 4 Waters. She should have the appearance of a dragon. She should be one of those vigorous, divine, mighty, and graceful divine dragons." He, Yingzheng, was cultivating the 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic, so what was the meaning of having a catfish swimming behind his back? Was it the 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic? If this was spread out, it would be a joke. Yingzheng pondered for a long while, but still could not make up his mind. Should he kill the Catfish Flood Dragon and become a heaven immortal, or should he wait a little longer and find a flood dragon with a graceful body, whose appearance was almost the same as a true dragon? Su Fu's face fell, and just when he was about to explain to Li Si, Yingzheng snorted displeasedly and said, "Enough. Shut up." Near and far, countless demon beasts let out earth-shattering roars simultaneously. Innumerable strange aquatic beasts rolled up endless waves, rushing towards Ji Hao and Ji Hao. Among these aquatic beasts, several dozens of them had an aura comparable to that of Earth Immortals of nascent soul realm, and over 2,000 large fishes, prawns, and other demon beasts had an aura comparable to that of human immortals of Jin Dan. Although the other aquatic beasts weren't as strong, they were still huge in size. Their brute strength and innate abilities were also not to be underestimated. Wu Qi was also dumbfounded. Legend has it that pythons could transform into flood dragons, and carps could transform into dragons. This was the heaven and earth's love for them, so their chances of transforming into flood dragons were much higher than ordinary creatures, and it was also much easier. As the sacred emperor who founded the Daqin dynasty, carrying a catfish on his back, this was really. Yingzheng's brows were locked in a tight frown, and he could not make up his mind for a long while. Li Si straightened his back, stared at Su Fu with a bright gleam in his eyes, and said in a cold voice, "Su Fu, it is true that I didn't eliminate the root of the problem, and that's why you were kidnapped. But, as the leader of His Majesty's close courtiers, the imperial advisor of Daqin dynasty, you were actually kidnapped by a junior. How can you blame me, Li Si, for this? You don't feel ashamed of this scandal, but do you think you have the capital to attack Li Si? If you were to cultivate into a heaven immortal with the help of this catfish flood dragon's blood essence and soul, for a very long period of time in the future, whenever he used the 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic to fight with someone, the shadow of a flood dragon manifested in the dark mist behind his back would take the form of a strange, fat catfish." Suddenly, the catfish flood dragon stopped patting her belly. Slowly, she turned her body, raised her head and looked at Yingzheng. She stared at Ingzheng with her two big eyes for a long while, then suddenly burst into a loud laughter and said, "You little thing, what are you talking about? You want me to offer you my soul and blood essence? You alone? TSK, your little size is not even enough to fill the gap between my teeth." The space between the catfish flood dragon and Ingzheng had turned into a frightening storm of thunderclouds. Dark clouds were rocking and rocking between them, and countless thunderbolts were producing deafening rumbles. Lightning bolts as thick as a water tank kept striking out from the thunderclouds, lighting up the entire lake 3,000 miles in circumference, making the figures of countless demon beasts hiding in Wuqi's lake water vaguely appear and disappear like ghosts. Baiqi snorted coldly, cupped his fist and said to Ingzheng, "Your Majesty, regardless of whether it is beautiful or ugly, a flood dragon is a flood dragon. It has the ability to ride on clouds and overturn rivers and seas. A flood dragon is a flood dragon, no matter what it looks like, as long as it is a true dragon." He sneered and said, "When your Majesty becomes a heaven immortal and cultivates the first stage of the 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic, you will be able to sweep across this world. When your Majesty decides what a true dragon looks like, it will be a true dragon. Why should I be afraid of what others think? Those who have any objection will have their entire clan wiped out." Ingzheng smacked his lips. He looked at Su Fu, then at Li Si, and a flame of fury rose in his heart. "Prime Minister, Li Si, you told me that you found a flood dragon. Good, I like it very much. But, is this the flood dragon you found? How can this thing be called a flood dragon?" Meanwhile, the catfish flood dragon stared furiously at the 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent behind Ingzheng's back. "I can't believe you've killed so many flood dragons. No wonder your magic power is so strong. But, if you want to deal with me, you can't just rely on magic power." Looking at the long dagger thrust down from Ingzheng, the catfish flood dragon threw her head back and let out a long cry. Abruptly, her huge tail sprung up and lashed out viciously. The tremendous suction force unleashed by Ingzheng and catfish flood dragon clashed head-on in midair. Both of them trembled and took a step forward at the same time. Although Ingzheng's body was hundreds or thousands of times smaller than catfish flood dragons, and several tens of thousands of times lighter than her, when both of them took a step forward at the same time, it was obvious that Ingzheng's strength was much stronger than catfish flood dragon. Baiqi raised his right fist and was about to give the order to attack catfish flood dragon together. But suddenly, Ingzheng's voice was heard coming from the sky. "What a powerful strength. Among all the flood dragons I've killed, you have the strongest fleshly strength. Excellent. After absorbing your blood essence and soul, my fleshly body will definitely reach a state where no magical treasures can harm me." With both hands clasped behind his back, Ingzheng stood in the middle of the forest, looking over at the catfish flood dragon who was stirring up a storm 100 miles away. His face was filled with uncertainty. Amidst a wild howl that shook the surrounding mountain ridges, Ingzheng trod on a cloud and flew back at top speed. In just a few seconds, Ingzheng, who kept coughing blood from his mouth, flew back to the battlefield. He pointed his finger at the catfish flood dragon, who had her eyes and mouth wide open, and cried out, "Wonderful! Wonderful! I can't believe that your fleshly body is even stronger than my fleshly body, which has absorbed 8 flood dragons and a great serpent who is about to transform into a flood dragon. You are indeed an extraordinary creature of the heaven and earth." Meanwhile, the catfish flood dragon cried out in pain. Ingzheng's dagger had left a several hundred feet long and 10 feet wide cut on her tail, nearly splitting it into 2. A great amount of pale golden blood sprayed out from her tail, and the pain made her body tremble violently. Immediately, she rolled up a wild wind and dark clouds, bringing together countless thunderbolts and bolts as she charged towards Baiqi and the other captains of Daqin dynasty, who were standing in formation. Ingzheng let out a loud laugh. Suddenly, a plume of dark mist burst out from his back, amidst which, the shadows of 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent were seen twisting and turning. Ingzheng opened his mouth and inhaled abruptly. A frightening suction force that was a few times stronger than catfish flood dragon's big mouth was produced out of nowhere. Amidst the deafening whistling of the wind, more water tornadoes rolled up from the surface of the lake, while more water was sucked up into the sky. Stronger hurricanes were kicked up, and huge waves tens of feet high rose from the surface of the lake. A great number of aquatic demon beasts could not withstand the tremendous force, and were sucked into the tornadoes, then crushed into pieces by the tremendous pressure. The Nine Dragons' Cauldron Grand Magic was a supreme divine ability he learned after he came to this world, a supreme Tao of divinity that cultivated the fleshly body, energy, and soul at the same time. Currently, what he lacked was the blood essence and soul of a flood dragon, which would allow him to form the power of a dragon and step into the realm of heaven immortal. However, the blood essence and soul of the final flood dragon he had absorbed would determine the appearance of the dragon power he had condensed. But for a catfish, Wuchi had never heard that a catfish could transform into a flood dragon in his entire life. It was not hard to imagine how long it had spent in the process of transforming into a flood dragon, and how many fortuitous encounters it had gone through. Therefore, it was only natural that it had a very strong fleshly body. Ordinary carps and serpents could transform into flood dragons after cultivating painstakingly for 1,000 years, but how much effort did this catfish have to spend to achieve its current strength? 10,000 years? 100,000 years? Perhaps it was even more than that. One could imagine how strong this Dharma body would be after spending several tens of thousands of years to temper its fleshly body. Ying Zheng's eyes lit up. Slowly, a dark mist emanated from his body, and he gave Baichi a look of appreciation as he said, "King of Wuan knows my mind well. He, why should I be afraid of what the people under the heaven think? Anyone who dares to object will be killed." Ha ha ha. Throwing his head back and letting out a few wild laughs, Ying Zheng pulled out an ancient colored dagger forged with some strange stone. Then, he cast a cloud and brought up a strong wind as he sped towards the catfish flood dragon. Together with several dozens of military officers, Baichi followed closely behind him, forming a formation capable of both offense and defense, protecting Ying Zheng's left, right, and rear. While laughing, Ying Zheng flew forward and soon came before the catfish flood dragon, who was lying on the surface of the water and drying her belly. He cried out sternly, "You evil creature, quickly offer me your blood essence and soul, and I'll spare you a thread of your soul for reincarnation. After thousands of reincarnations, you will still have a chance to be reborn." Hastily, both men shut their mouths and returned to their wooden expressions, bowing their heads and not saying a word. Then, both men peeked at the catfish flood dragon from the corner of their eyes. Su Fu had a gloating smile on his face, while Li Si was looking at the catfish flood dragon indifferently, his eyes cold and indifferent, as if nothing mattered to him. Su Fu had seen through Ying Zheng's mind, so he kept bowing his head and crossing his arms, refusing to say a word. Li Si was a quick-witted man. He knew that the flood dragon he found was a real flood dragon, and a very powerful one at that. But, the appearance of this flood dragon was a little shabby. When he thought that Ying Zheng would take the form of a catfish flood dragon for a long period of time in the future, Li Si carefully bent down and hid behind Ying Zheng's back, not daring to say a word. As Ying Zheng and the catfish flood dragon were crazily sucking the water, a huge amount of lake water kept turning into water tornadoes and flying up into the sky, then being sucked into their bodies. In the blink of an eye, the lake water that entered their bodies was broken down into the tiniest water element by a tremendous force, turning into billowing dark mists and clouds that sprayed out from their bodies, blanketing the void within 1,000 miles in circumference with a dense mist. The water level of the lake kept dropping, and in just a blink of an eye, all the lake water within 100 miles around them had been sucked up into the sky, exposing the pitch-black bottom of the lake, which was densely covered with countless reefs and shells. A loud boom rang out, as the surface of the lake within 200 miles suddenly froze, then shattered into pieces. Countless demon beasts were ripped to shreds by the explosion. Ying Zheng was slapped far away by the huge tail of the catfish flood dragon. Even with Wu Qi's mystic eyes of universe which had an incredible eyesight, he could only vaguely see Ying Zheng being slapped up into the sky, piercing through a dozen layers of clouds, and then being blown several hundred miles away by a strong wind that came sweeping across the sky. Looking at the aquatic demon beasts that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, Wuqi finally understood why so many of the cultivators sent out by Great Yan Dynasty were killed in Meng Mountains. Countless aquatic demon beasts leaped up and surrounded Ing Zheng and his company in just a blink of an eye. Li Si blinked his eyes and bowed deeply, not daring to say a word. When Su Fu saw how Li Si behaved, a wave of resentment surged up from his heart. He said in a low voice, "Could this be the divine dragon in Prime Minister's heart? This is a great disrespect to His Majesty, a crime of deceiving him." Chapter 171. Behind Ing Zheng, Baiqi sprung up into the sky. Holding a white sword in his hand, he viciously hacked the back of the old turtle. The old turtle howled miserably. His back, which was stronger than diamond, was ripped apart by Baiqi's sword, severely injuring the inside of his body. But at the same time, Baiqi was smashed down by the frightening force brought by the huge weight of the old turtle, and fell into the rolling lake in a sorry state. Immediately, several dozens of long tentacles that looked like an octopus squeezed out from under the water, wrapped around Baiqi's body, and dragged him into the depths of the lake. Clutching the pearl in her hand, Catfish Flood Dragon stepped on a dark cloud and chased after Ing Zheng and his company angrily. At the same time, Ing Zheng and his company had returned to the peak of the lofty mountain, and the group of demon beasts had arrived at a place less than 3 miles away from the lofty mountain. Sighing for a while, Wuqi watched the group of demon beasts rush toward the ambush that Ing Zheng had prepared beforehand, and he could not help but shake his head. Suddenly, Baiqi took a step forward, spat out a mouthful of mucus from the squid, and roared in exasperation, "Qin crossbow killing formation, kill!" Ing Zheng raised the seal in his hand up high, performed an incantation gesture and struck it into the seal, then cried out with a stern voice, "9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic, sword sweeps 6 directions. Get the hell out of my way!" Ing Zheng gave a loud cry that swept across all directions like a thunderclap. Several dozens of demon beasts who had formed their demon cores were knocked back while coughing blood, and were knocked several tens of miles away by the soundwave. Behind Ing Zheng, the figures of 8 flood dragons and 1 serpent suddenly converged inwardly, and in a blink of an eye, they had transformed into a black seal the size of a fist, engraved with 9 coiling dragons. He grabbed the seal and cried out, "9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic, 9 Provinces Conquering Grand Magic." Suddenly, several dozens of thunderbolts struck down from the sky, smashing towards Ing Zheng in a messy manner. But they were all crushed into pieces by Ing Zheng's palm. Meanwhile, Catfish Flood Dragon, who had curled up into a meatball, was shrinking rapidly. In just the time of 2 to 3 breaths, Catfish Flood Dragon had transformed into a strange black-clothed lady, 5 feet tall, with a bloated body, a catfish head, and a dragon horn in the middle of her skull. She casually made a grabbing motion towards the bottom of the lake. Suddenly, a loud rumbling sound came from the bottom of the lake, and a black pearl the size of a human head slowly floated up, emitting a tremendous amount of water elemental energy. Countless water and yin thunders kept exploding crazily around Ing Zheng, making him tremble violently. Yet, none of them could break through the dark mist that shielded him. Ing Zheng stood amidst the dark mist with the imperial seal in his hand, his eyes bursting with a boundless murderous aura. His power alone was enough to fight against the demonic aura emanated from all the demon beasts in the entire Lake of 4 Waters. 2 gigantic green prawn demons, each having a length of over 1,000 feet, glinting with a green gleam as if they were carved out of gems, let out a shrill cry. Each of them had 6 arms carrying 6 oddly shaped fangs, as they charged towards the several dozens of nascent soul realm captains behind Ing Zheng. The front limbs of these green prawns had a very strong explosive force. With just 1 foot-long front limb, they could shatter a crystal glass as thick as a thumb. As for these 2 green prawns who had become demon beasts, with just 1 thrust of their front limbs, they could pierce through a few lofty mountains. Coincidentally, Ing Zheng raised the imperial seal again and swung it down forcefully. 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic, sword stabilizing 8 directions. Catfish Flood Dragon, who had shrunk herself into a meatball, roared at the top of her voice, "Kill! Kill all these people in front of us. Whoever dares to retreat, I'll definitely eat him or her later. As Catfish Flood Dragon's furious roar echoed out, countless demon beasts charged towards Ing Zheng and his company, braving the sword beams that blotted the sky. Among them, those demon beasts whose overall strength was equivalent to Earth Immortals of nascent soul realm were the first to strike, unleashing their innate divine abilities. A series of creaking noises rang out, as several hundred Jin Dan soldiers standing halfway up the mountain pulled out huge crossbows, each with an arm longer than an adult man. They knocked the bowstrings, then placed rows of specially made bolts, each measuring 8 feet and 1 inch long. Nonchalantly, the group of practitioners led by Su Fu pointed their fingers at the air. Countless runes shot out from their fingertips, slowly merging into the bolts. An old turtle demon, whose back armor measured over 2,000 feet in circumference, let out a loud howl as his huge body suddenly shot up into the sky. After that, he spun rapidly like a frisbee, smashing down towards Ing Zheng's head with his back armor. When the old turtle demon's body fell down, watery clouds rolled and rolled around him, while countless thunderbolts burst out from his back armor, smashing down towards Ing Zheng with deafening booms. Abruptly, the pitch-black imperial seal expanded and transformed into countless sword beams, each 1,000 feet long, that swept and slashed in all directions. The power of these sword beams was nearly equal to a full-force strike unleashed by a late-stage Jin Dan human immortal with a lower-grade magical treasure. The power of these sword beams was peerless, and in just a blink of an eye, they had covered the entire lake of four water. Wherever the countless sword beams went, all the demon beasts who had formed their demon cores were struck and killed. The blood of all kinds of demon beasts had even dyed the surface of the lake into a different color. Such an innate divine ability was something that even Wu Qi, who had cultivated the Dharma body of an earth immortal, could not compare with. Man was the most intelligent of all living beings, but all the birds, beasts, and insects under the heaven also had their own extraordinary abilities. When they cultivated to a certain level, they could evolve this innate ability into a divine ability, which would be no weaker than the Taoist magic of human cultivators. On the contrary, it would be even stronger. A large amount of sticky, pale green blood sprayed out from the shrimp demon's body, spraying onto the body of the battle general. Loud ripping noises kept echoing out. The corrosive force of the shrimp demon's blood was 100 times stronger than Aqua Regia. The nascent soul battle general let out a miserable howl as his armor melted abruptly. After that, his skin and muscles were melted into a puddle of poisonous liquid by the shrimp demon's blood. Nevertheless, the battle general was a decisive man. Without hesitation, he self-detonated his body. A beam of blood shot out from his dantian, amidst which, his nascent soul, which stood 2 feet and 3 inches tall, fled in panic. In just one volley, nearly 10,000 demon beasts had their bodies pierced through, dying tragically on the spot. Seeing that so many demon beasts in the lake were wounded by Ing Zheng with just a single strike, the catfish flood dragon let out a wild roar in exasperation. She grabbed fiercely towards the surface of the lake with 4 claws, causing 4 water dragons to shoot up into the sky. Like 4 long whips, the pitch-black water dragons were waved wildly and thrust towards Ing Zheng's face. When the water dragons took shape, the water level of the lake of 4 water, which measured 3,000 miles in circumference, dropped by nearly 1,000 feet. It was not hard to tell how much water was stored in these 4 water dragons. There were 13 bolts in a single crossbow, and with a loud noise, a large number of bolts were shot whistling out. The bolts tore through the air and brought up a long trail of dark smoke, which twisted and turned into the shape of the heads of wild beasts on the surface of the bolts. The runes which Su Fu and the other practitioners had cast on the bolts had attracted the ferocious souls of all the wild beasts and birds that could be found everywhere in the woods, and attached them to the bolts, making the power of the bolts several dozens of times stronger. Suddenly, the pearl of fire and element in Wu Qi's dantian moved, resonating with the black pearl from a distance. Wu Qi was struck dumb. Judging from the reaction, the black pearl was also an acquired natural spirit item, and it contained an enormous amount of water element essence, which was a perfect match with the pearl in his dantian. Holding the seal in his hand, Ing Zheng pressed it down forcefully. An invisible force came crashing out, and all the aquatic demon beasts that came within 30 miles around him fell from the sky while howling miserably. Some of the weaker demon beasts, such as loaches and eels, had their bodies torn apart by the tremendous force. Wounds of various sizes opened up on their bodies, and a huge amount of blood sprayed out from them. Some unlucky demon beasts had their bodies ripped into two by the tremendous force, sending their internal organs and bones flying all over the place. But before they could flee for another 30 miles, a pitch-black turtle demon suddenly revealed himself from the dark clouds that blotted the sky. Holding a pair of large hammers in his hands, the turtle demon stretched his neck and stared at the fleeing nascent soul with a pair of beady eyes, then smashed the hammers down towards the fleeing nascent soul. A miserable howl rang out, as the fleeing nascent soul was smashed into pieces by the hammers. Then, a water element in thunder burst out from the hammers and blew a thread of his broken soul into pieces. The nascent soul battle general's soul was completely destroyed, completely vanishing from this world. It was especially so for the giant squid. Apparently, it had suffered a great loss when it tangled with Bai Qi, and that was why it kept spitting out clouds of smoke and foam while roaring and leaping forward, using its several dozens of tentacles to thrash Ying Zheng's body. Wu Qi was puzzled by what he saw. This was an inland lake, so how could there be a creature like a squid demon here? But on second thought, since even flood dragons existed in this lake, it should not be strange for there to be a giant squid here, right? 13 nascent soul battle generals stepped on clouds and greeted the two giant squid demons. They too drew their swords and charged forward, using their pure strength to fight head-on with the two giant squid demons. A series of several dozens of loud clanking noises were heard, as the 12 nascent soul battle generals were knocked flying backward while coughing blood. The heart protection mirrors on their chests had been shattered by the sharp teeth of the giant squid demons. Only the last battle general let out a furious roar, flipped his sword and brutally hacked on the chest armor of one of the giant squid demons, leaving a very long cut on its chest armor. These demon beasts are ferocious. Retreat, cried Ying Zheng. A dark mist rushed out from under his feet and surrounded him, shielding Bai Qi and the others as they quickly fled towards the lofty mountain where Li Si and Su Fu had deployed the formation. How could these demon beasts know what was good or bad, and how could they know any trick to lure the enemy? While laughing wildly and joyfully, they chased after Ying Zheng and his company with their heads held high. The catfish flood dragon had a huge body, and at least several tens of thousands of sword beams kept hitting her body. Under the full power of Ying Zheng, the sword beams contained a boundless murderous aura, and the penetrating strength of each sword beam was incredibly strong. The catfish flood dragon's huge body kept trembling, as large pieces of scales were sliced off by the sword beams. Drops of blood kept bursting out from her body, and some of the sword beams even sliced off large chunks of flesh from her body, causing pale golden blood to spray out like a rainstorm. The pain made her body shiver violently, and her body shrunk into a meatball. The bolt streaked across the sky, whistling across the distance of 100 miles. Suddenly, the bodies of all the demon beasts who were charging forward turned stiff, and in the next moment, countless demon beasts plunged down like raindrops. 8 enormous black sword beams darted out from the seal, sweeping across all directions with a jarring whistle, cutting the tentacles of the giant squid into countless pieces on the spot, while the bodies of several hundred huge demon beasts were sliced apart by the sword beams. The pain made them howl and retreat, but there were also several dozens of demon beasts who had lost all their life force and plunged into the lake. A furious roar towered up into the sky from under the water, as Bai Qi, whose body was stained with all sorts of strange mucus and blood, fled from the lake in a sorry state. A giant squid, about 3 miles long and covered with countless shells and algae, slowly emerged from the water. It stared fiercely at Bai Qi with its eyes gleaming with a ferocious gleam as it roared with a muffled voice, "I've eaten, I've eaten, I've eaten." With a shake of its body, 7 to 8 tentacles suddenly grew to several tens of miles long, grabbing towards Bai Qi with a jarring noise. A loud boom rang out as 4 water dragons were ripped to shreds. Countless streams of water shot up into the sky, turning into a heavy downpour that blanketed an area of 10,000 miles in circumference. Ying Zheng hovered steadily in midair, taking the brute force of the attack head-on. Blood burst out from his 7 apertures, and his robe was ripped to shreds by the water dragons. Half of his body was bruised and swollen, and soon turned dark purple. While coughing blood, Ingzheng stared at the catfish flood dragon and laughed wildly. "You're able to hurt my body of a true dragon. You do have some abilities, catfish demon. I've taken a fancy to you, and you're the best candidate for me to cultivate the 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic." Chapter 172. A strange gleam flickered in Wuqi's eyes. Under his gaze, all the secrets of those strange bolts were revealed. The bolts were forged using the ice and snow essence of the northernmost ice and the 9 nether dark iron, which was produced in the filthy and evil land in the earth's core. They were extremely and evil, and contained a thread of evil poison that could destroy the corporeal body and soul of cultivators. During the forging process, at least 19 deadly poisons had been added into the bolts, each of which was powerful enough to kill a Jin Dan human immortal in an instant. They were one of the most vicious objects under the heaven. On top of that, the runes that Su Fu and the other practitioners had cast on the bolts were called the soul-melting spell, which borrowed the power of evil souls to melt the corporeal body of cultivators. It was a very powerful spell. When the bolts were shot at the same time, apart from those demon beasts whose cultivation base was comparable to earth immortals who barely survived, all the other demon beasts within 100 miles were killed by the bolts. Blood rained down from the sky. Apart from several dozens of the strongest demon beasts hovering in midair, all the other demon beasts plunged into the lake, splashing the water up into the sky. Catfish Flood Dragon, who had rushed up excitedly with the black pearl in her hand, was stunned as well. Standing on a cloud, she stared blankly at the practitioners and soldiers of Daqin, who had formed a formation in front of her. She felt a chill run down her spine, and dared not to go any further. With just one strike, over 10,000 demon beasts were killed. How many demon beasts were there in the Lake of 4 Waters? The formation in front of her had given her a great threat, a threat that was strong enough to kill her. After hesitating for a brief moment, Catfish Flood Dragon gave a loud cry, then stepped on a demon wind and fled toward the center of the lake. Those powerful demon beasts were not stupid. Since even the strongest overlord of the Lake of 4 Waters had fled for her life, they naturally followed closely behind Catfish Flood Dragon, stepping on the demon wind and spitting clouds and mist all the way. A cold, mocking smile emerged on Ingzheng's face as he cried out in a deep voice, "Since you've come, don't leave. Catfish Flood Dragon, you're mine, and no one can save you." In the middle of the formation, Su Fu glanced at Li Si and said coolly, "Prime Minister, please make your move." Li Si nodded his head. He took out the strange scroll and writing brush, staring at the crowd of demon beasts that were running away at top speed. Then, he casually wrote the word / on the scroll. Li Si softly shouted, "Words are the law. / kill in all directions." With a gentle flick of the brush, the word sever quietly flew out. Suddenly, it turned into a faint light that was almost invisible to the naked eye and shot forward. A series of shrill howls could be heard, and the bodies of the slowest monster beasts suddenly split open from the middle, and their internal organs and blood fell into the lake. The dozens of demon beasts in front of them roared in pain. Countless wounds had appeared on their bodies, and some of the wounds even penetrated their internal organs. Through the huge wounds, one could see their squirming internal organs. Some of the demon beasts were too heavily injured and could no longer ride the clouds, so they also fell into the lake. Li Si smiled. Once again, he casually wrote the word turn on the scroll. He snorted lightly and said, "Words are the law. Turn, move the stars." Then, he flicked the tip of the writing brush, unleashing a beam of light that fell onto the Catfish Flood Dragon, who was running for her life. A strange fluctuation of natural energies arose, and in the next moment, her body disappeared from the spot. When she reappeared, she was already several miles behind Ingzheng and his company. Her body was shrouded in a dark cloud, as she was seen gritting her teeth and rushing towards Ingzheng and his company at top speed. Su Fu smiled coolly and said, "Prime Minister, your divine ability is indeed marvelous." Suddenly, the catfish flood dragon, who was running for her life with her head lowered, noticed that the scenery underneath her was different. A moment ago, it was a vast lake under her head, but now, it had turned into a mountain range. She hastily raised her head and looked ahead, and saw Ingzheng, whose upper body was bared, looking at her with a smile on his face. The catfish flood dragon cried out in shock. She opened her mouth and unleashed several dozens of water element thunderbolts, smashing towards Ingzheng and Baiqi. After that, she turned her head and flew away in a slanted direction. The tip of Li Si's riding brush moved again, and the catfish flood dragon's body disappeared abruptly. She reappeared right in front of Ingzheng, still riding the cloud and flying towards him. No matter how she changed the direction of her flight, as long as Li Si moved his brush, she would always appear at the same spot and continue flying towards Ingzheng. Ingzheng grabbed and shattered the water element thunderbolt, breathed out a long sigh and said, "Evil creature, just follow me. I'll seize your blood essence and soul, and refine them into the 9 dragons cauldron grand magic. In the future, when I unify the world, I'll build an ancestral hall for you to enjoy the worship of incense. What do you think? I've already shown you a great kindness by allowing your soul to reincarnate. Could it be that you really want to be beaten to the point where your soul disperses and you don't even have the last bit of hope for reincarnation?" Flustered and exasperated, the catfish flood dragon roared, "Ancestral hall? I've already become a ghost in the underworld, so why would I need an ancestral hall? How rude of you! How dare you intrude into this forest and slaughter my people? Do you know that I'm a subordinate of Wanying Dragon King, and I was ordered by him to guard over the Lake of Four Water? I'm the mountain protector of the eastern gate of Meng Mountains. If you kill me, Wanying Dragon King will never forgive you." It would have been better if she did not say that, but after she said that, Ingzheng's face turned extremely unsightly. He reached out his hand and touched the wound on his chest, which had more than half healed, but still looked ferocious. He sneered and said, "Wanying Dragon King? It seems the demon dragon who wounded me that day calls himself Wanying Dragon King. So, you, evil creature, are the subordinate of that demon dragon? Good, good, good." After shouting, "Good," 3 times, Ingzheng cried out sternly, "Activate the formation, trap and kill it." Immediately, Su Fu let out a long and sonorous cry. Both of his palms moved like lightning bolts, unleashing beams of strange light. The few hundred practitioners around him struck at the same time, coordinating with the runes unleashed by Su Fu and unleashing all kinds of primordial runes. The runes unleashed by Su Fu were the trunk, and the runes unleashed by these practitioners were the branches and leaves. They circled around the trunk and transformed into a sheet of hazy light, which instantly blanketed the sky for several tens of miles in circumference, including the catfish flood dragon and all the people. Those fleeing demon beasts were scared out of their wits by the ferocious methods of Ingzheng and his men. They could no longer care about their immediate superiors, and had plunged back into the Lake of Four Water to hide themselves, not daring to come out again. The catfish flood dragon was trapped in this small patch of sky, facing Ingzheng and over 1,000 mighty cultivators of Daqin dynasty all by herself. Baiqi led the soldiers and flew up into the sky, surrounding catfish flood dragon, who was so frightened that she did not know what to do. He kept unleashing one sword beam after another, smashing her and sending her flying all over the sky. The sword beams unleashed by Baiqi did not hurt catfish flood dragon's body, but they always made her tremble and suffer severe pain. After dozens of rounds of attacks, catfish flood dragon's vitality was severely damaged, and the dark mist around her had dimmed by half. Unable to bear the pain, she gave a shrill cry and sprung up into the sky, crashing into the light formed by the primordial runes. A loud boom rang out, as several dozens of green thunderbolts came bursting out of nowhere and exploded her, causing water vapor to surge and blood to spray out from her 7 apertures. Her body was charred like a fish in a frying pan, and she scrambled back in a sorry state. How could it be so easy to break through the primordial runes formed by Su Fu and his men? All of a sudden, Li Si waved his hand and cast out a tiny character, mountain. Just like what Wu Qi did that day, a small mountain came whistling down from above and hit right on the catfish flood dragon. A miserable howl rang out, as she was knocked down from the sky by the small mountain. She fell to her knees on the ground, holding the small mountain above her head with both hands while staring at Li Si and his men with a ferocious gleam in her eyes. Ying Zheng laughed. He looked at the catfish flood dragon, who was suppressed by Li Si's Dharma word, and said in an indifferent voice, "Evil creature, do you want to obey me? I'll give you a chance. Release your true spirit and be reincarnated, leaving your fleshly body and soul behind. If you dare to do anything unusual again, I'll definitely kill your true spirit, and not give you the chance to be reincarnated." Catfish flood dragon twisted her wrist, wanting to throw out the black pearl to attack the enemy. But, when she saw the ferocious faces of Bai Qitian, and the other Daqin generals, she felt a chill run down her spine, and dared not to throw out her last trump card so easily. She gnashed her teeth and stared at Ying Zheng for a while, then screamed, "His Majesty Wanying Dragon King will definitely avenge me. All of you will die in this mountain. Today, you have slaughtered over 10,000 aquatic demons in the Lake of Four Waters, which means you are going against the hundreds of millions of aquatic demons in Longyuan River. All of you will die in this forest." Hundreds of millions of aquatic demons? A murderous look flashed across Ying Zheng's face as he said in a deep voice, "Once I've mastered my divine ability, I'll deploy all 10 million tiger soldiers of Daqin to wipe out all the aquatic demons in Longyuan River. I'll kill every single one of them, not leaving a single fish or shrimp alive." Ying Zheng sneered and said proudly, "That Wanying Dragon King is destined to be the first dragon's soul of the second stage of my 9 Dragons Cauldron Grand Magic." He strode to a place about 1,000 feet away from the catfish flood dragon, performed an incantation gesture with both hands, and was about to grab her. Catfish flood dragon's eyes went wide. She had the black pearl in her right palm, which was holding the artificial mountain above her head, and was about to throw it towards Ying Zheng. At the same time, Wu Qi had stealthily sneaked 3 feet under the ground. With such a short distance between them, Wu Qi carefully transmitted his voice to the catfish flood dragon, not letting Ying Zheng and the others hear his voice. Then, he said in a low voice, "Listen up, big catfish. If you give me the black pearl and all your treasures, I'll save you from this disaster." The catfish flood dragon's eyes narrowed, and she nodded her head heavily. She was smart enough to keep her mouth shut. However, the little mountain above her head was getting heavier and heavier, making her body tremble. She could only hold the little mountain with one last breath, and she did not have the strength to speak. "Swear on your prime soul that you'll give me all your treasures, and you won't use any means to punish me for taking advantage of your precarious situation. Only then will I save you." Wu Qi smiled. Looting a burning house was also a kind of great thief. As long as it was used well, it could make people willingly give up their treasures. The catfish flood dragon took a deep breath, mustered up the last bit of her strength and roared out, "I swear on my prime soul to the heavenly fiend, that whoever can save me, all my treasures will belong to him. On top of that, I'll definitely not punish him after the incident, and I'll treat him as a distinguished guest." Ying Zheng's expression fell instantly upon hearing the catfish flood dragon's loud shout. He shouted harshly, "Who's here? Who dares to ruin my plan?" While laughing wildly, Wu Qi had already sprung up into the sky from underground. Facing all the surrounding Earth immortals and Jin Dan human immortals, he fearlessly took out over 6,000 talismans drawn by Elder Jin Dan of Heavenly Spirit sect from his storage ring. He even threw out the 5 huge talisman treasures, exhaling 5 mouthfuls of innate energy onto them. Wu Qi did not want to form a talisman formation in his Jin Dan, as it would make him unable to use any flying swords or magical treasures in the future. Although these 5 talisman treasures were very powerful, they were of little value to Wu Qi. Therefore, without any hesitation, Wu Qi took out all 5 talisman treasures and brazenly launched their last and strongest attack, self-detonation. Over 6,000 talismans exploded in an instant, which was equivalent to 6,000 human immortals of Jin Dan attacking at the same time with all their might within a distance of about 1 mile. The power of the self-detonation of 5 talisman treasures was equivalent to a desperate attack launched by 5 Mahayana Jin Dan cultivators by burning their divine souls. Such an attack had instantly sucked away all the natural energies within a radius of 100 miles. No matter it was Su Fu's talisman formation or the divine ability of Dharma word, as they had lost the supply of natural energies, they shattered with a loud boom. Wu Qi let out a wild laugh, grabbed the catfish flood dragon, and transformed into a beam of yellow light, plunging into the ground. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.